All right, thank you everyone for coming. So I'm Ben Janis. You might recognize me as the little flag on Slack. I am a embedded security engineer at MITRE, and I help run the eCTF. And 7 years ago, I was actually in the seats there with you as a competitor back in 2017. So it's great to continue to be part of the eCTF. So thank you all for coming. As a quick reminder, this is being recorded and they're being live streamed on Zoom. If you want to share with friends and family, the link has been posted on the website and on Slack. This really today is about all of you and all of the great work that you've done this semester. The eCTF, we know, is a hard competition. It takes a lot of work, a lot of dedication to get to the point you've done, that you made it to. And really, this is our big celebration of all of the great work you've done. With that, I want to introduce Moe Solomon. So Moe Solomon is the director of the Electronic Systems and Technology Innovation Center at MITRE. The Electronic Systems and Technology Innovation Center focuses on analysis, prototyping, and securing systems that are enabled by a manner of emerging technologies, microelectronics, embedded systems, mechanical systems. Moe's center consists of a multitude of laboratories from hardware security to blue tech, marine testing to evaluate and demonstrate the capabilities in realistic conditions. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Moise.
Great, thank you. Okay, great. This is so exciting. We started this program 9 years ago, so this is I think the ninth collegiate program, and at that time there was 20 schools, all high schools. It's really evolved into this international program with high schools, with colleges. I think we have 99 teams this year, which is just an incredible accomplishment. When we started this, there were really no or very few academic programs focused on on hardware security. Plenty of people doing cyber, but this intersection, which is very unique and still kind of rare in academia, was not covered at all. And we needed a way to identify and get students interested in this area for our own use. And I think, as Ben mentioned, right, I think all our team who have been working with you on the competition have come through this program. We hire a lot of interns. We matriculate a lot of those interns into our staff, and now our sponsors and others are also able to hire you guys. So I would really encourage you, if you haven't, talk to the sponsors here, right? They're really interested in talking with you. A couple of things that have allowed us to scale this program. One is we have a very generous grant from Northeast Microelectronics Coalition Hub. So this is allowing us to scale the program even greater through this year and into next year. Thank you, NEMC Hub. Yep. And so we also have strong partnerships with our sponsors from Fortinet, CloudStrike, BCI, Idaho Scientific, and Analog Devices. So we could not do this without all of this support. So please, let's thank them also. And again, there are representatives here from NSTXL that run the DoD Microelectronics Commons, to NEMC, to Fortinet, et cetera. So please try to reach out to them. Get some swag from the tables if you haven't. Great. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ben Linlingler. Ben is the Deputy Director and Chief Investment Strategist and Program Executive at Massachusetts Technology Collaborative. In this capacity, he works across the agency's divisions, funds, and programs to align investments with ecosystem needs, emerging technology trends, and sector priorities to create impact in the Commonwealth's technology and innovation economy. Ben has responsibility for the agency's Center for Advanced Manufacturing, Mass Cyber Center, Massachusetts eHealth Institute, and the Northeast Microelectronics Coalition Hub. From September 23 through March 24, Ben served as the acting director of the NEMC Hub, which was selected as a Department of Defense Microelectronics Commons Hub with funding coming from CHIPS and Science Act. I first met Ben about 3 years ago as actually, he came to our groundbreaking for a Blue Tech tank. We quickly realized we have the same academic background, but like 15 years difference in age, both graduating from the MIT SDM program. But it really, to get to this point with the NEMC hub was 3 years of work in the Northeast community to kind of pull that hub here. And so what I would suggest, for you folks who are interested in this kind of work, talk to Ben, talk to Farhad, Stephanie, Lynn, and find out what some of the opportunities are. We have internship programs and other things available. It's a really exciting time to be in this field. So over to Ben.
Well, thank you, Moise, and thank you, everybody. I'm really excited to be here. As Moise mentioned, my name is Ben Linlingler. I serve as the Deputy Director and Chief Investment Strategist for the Mass Tech Collaborative. So for all the students in the room, I know you might see that title and be like, I can't believe they brought someone here to talk about investment and economics. I promise by the end of this, you'll find out I am one of you guys, so that's goal one for my talk today. I won't spend a ton of time on investment strategy and economics. We're going to get into the fun stuff on hardware security. But there's a few other things I want to make sure that in my talk today I can connect with you guys on. One is, as Moise mentioned, like the importance and the current opportunity here in the U.S. around microelectronics and how this fits into a broader modern American industrial strategy. Number two is, from some past career experience, I also want to just emphasize the real-world importance of what you guys have been doing this year in specific to your challenge on embedded medical devices. But before that, I do want to say thank you to MITRE for hosting this event, to Moise, to Doug, to Allison, I think she's in the back. Thanks, Allison. But also to Dan, to Ben, who I learned is, one, shares the first name with me, so that's always a good thing, but two, is an alum of the program. So I think he was in year 2 of this program, and now he's here on this stage. So I think that's a pretty incredible feat in terms of the program and where it's going, but also to Fritz and the rest of the team. We are designated as a hub from the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense Research and Engineering, so I want to say thank you to them, to NSWC Crane, but also to the National Security Technology Accelerator and Stephanie Lynn, who you'll hear from later today. Lastly, to my NEMC Hub team, if you guys could just quickly raise your hand so folks can find you. Farhad, Adam, Mark, Kelly in the back there. And also some of our members of part of NEMC are here. If you're a NEMC member, could you also raise your hand? I know there's a few of you here. MITRE, everybody should be raising your hand. Thank you. Mass Tech is a state economic development agency. Our mission is to strengthen the competitiveness of the technology and innovation economy here in Massachusetts. So for those of you that have come from out of state, the Secretary of Economic Development has asked me to keep all of you here, so you're not allowed to go back home. That's strengthening the competitiveness of our economy. But currently, we've been around for about 40 years, but we are organized around different sectors and different parts of technology development. Some is short-term strategy, some is long-term strategy. Long-term being emerging technology cluster development growth, things like quantum or AI, advanced robotic systems. But we also have some divisions that touch on a lot of the work that you guys have been doing. We have an eHealth Digital Health Institute where we actually work with some folks at MITRE on security, cybersecurity for the healthcare system. We do have a Mass Cyber Center that does a lot on cyber readiness and awareness for our municipalities, but also for manufacturers and healthcare. But the most recent addition to the Mass Tech portfolio divisions is the NEMC Hub. And as Moise mentioned, this comes from funding through the CHIPS and Science Act. Who here has heard of the CHIPS and Science Act? Pretty good. This is better than the last talk I gave a few weeks ago where I think I had 3 people in the room. So we're starting off on a better foot here. But the CHIPS and Science Act is one of a set of legislation and activities that the federal government has been doing to really put forward this modern American industrial strategy. Some of that has to do with economic security and national security. The CHIPS side is very much focused on that, leveraging our strengths. But also some of it is to leverage equity from a regional standpoint in terms of engaging more parts of the country, more people in the country to support technology and innovation, development, economic opportunity. So the Microelectronics Commons is the Department of Defense's bucket of funding for this, of which we've been selected as one hub. We are actively engaged in launching our hub. That's what we've been doing the last 6 months with partners such as MITRE, Analog Devices, BAE Systems, Raytheon, Columbia University, MIT Lincoln Labs, and the other advisory group member is NextFlex. But we have over 170 members in the Northeast region in Massachusetts, but also others from the US. That's over 600 creative individuals that make up our hub. And we're all working together to pursue lab-to-fab transitions of technologies and things like AI hardware, 5G, 6G technologies. But for this room, things like Secure Edge, of which MITRE has been a really strong partner and leader in for us. As Moise mentioned, back in January, we announced the funding for expansion of the eCTF program. But in addition to that, we also provided funding for a early college internship program focused on freshman and sophomore students. We want to make sure that we get more of you in this room and less people in software engineering. My brother's a software engineer. There's nothing wrong with software engineers, but we need more electrical engineers. As well as a STEM-based program to focus on high school interest and awareness in terms of what is electronics and microelectronics and advanced manufacturing, and also a reskilling and upskilling program for veterans. All of this comes together because, in general, for chips to be a reality for the US, we need more of everything. We need more engineers. We need more manufacturing technicians. We need more people in quality. We need more people in cybersecurity. We need more trainers. We need more people to help teach all of these things. So I'm really excited to have all of you here because you guys are already in it. So I'm really happy that you're doing that, but please bring your friends next year too. Folks that are not in this room, let's see if we can double and maybe book out a bigger venue next year. As one of these 8 hubs, a strong approach that we have is our connection with the Healy-Driscoll administration. In addition to the Department of Defense funding, they have dedicated up to $40 million to support the activities of our hub over the next 5 years. So a lot of opportunity for us to continue to grow. So I mentioned step 1 was make sure that you guys might think maybe I'm one of you, so I hope we're getting to that approach. 2 is the importance of what you're doing and this modern American strategy, our industrial strategy. So step 3 is I want to connect you with a little bit of the real world importance of this. So prior to my role at MassTech, I served as the industry co-director for a program that Moise mentioned, MIT System Design and Management. In my past life before that, I spent a decade in the med device surgical systems industry. I'm a mechanical biomedical engineer. I say that in a room of a bunch of embedded hardware electrical engineers. So I want to explain to you how I found my path here and why this is important. When I did mechanical engineering at the University of Colorado, there were 2 courses that I took in my undergrad that I said I don't want anything to do with those in my career. One was thermal systems, is figuring out the heating and ventilating capacity for rooms. Not for me. The second one was circuits and electronics. When I went into industry as a mechanical product development engineer, I very quickly got into R&D for electrosurgical systems. How surgeons can use modulating voltage and current to actually do some really useful things in helping to cut off blood supply if you have to remove tissue or an organ from somebody. Now, what's really important about this is that when you look at the real-world use cases for embedded systems in medical devices or other areas, trust is paramount, and trust is distributed across a whole bunch of different people that are involved. The patient, and I've been to hundreds of surgeries, the patient is, God forbid they wake up, but they never see any of the instruments, they never see any of the equipment that's in the room. The surgeon, all you want them to focus on is the screen that they're looking at so they can navigate inside maybe the abdominal cavity. You don't want them looking inside your equipment. You don't want them to know what's inside of there. Believe me, I've tried to explain to them what is an FPGA or CPLD. This is where I'm trying to let you guys know I know some of these acronyms. It's not important to them. All that's important is that when they press a button and they're clamped down on a blood vessel, that in 3 to 4 seconds, it seals the blood vessel shut, they can cut it and keep moving. Now, I bring that up because there's trust between the patient and the surgeon. There's trust between the surgeon and the engineer, but you have to earn that trust. And it's really important that it works, and it works the right way. And there's a lot that goes into making these systems work, and you guys know this. It's really hard to make something clinically validated. It's really difficult to make sure something fails safe if it does fail. It's really hard to make sure that you can manufacture more than one of something consistently. And so delivering a safe and effective medical device is hard enough when you're trying to do it without somebody working against you, potential bad actors trying to get into the system, to change the way that it's functioning, to access data. And so the work that you guys are doing and the work that you've done over the course of this program is really critical because you're helping to make all these systems better, right? We can try to think things forward as much as possible, but the feedback loop of where you find vulnerabilities so that you can fix those the next time around is really, really critical. Because that's part of that distributed chain of trust. Because the surgeon's not going to be thinking about that, right? The patient is not going to be thinking about that. The FDA is interested in that, but they want to make sure that you guys are thinking about that if you go into this particular line of work. So I mentioned I met, hundreds of surgeons, and they love engineers, especially when things work. But most of the time, they don't know that I'm a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer or a software engineer. They know that you're an engineer, just like oftentimes we don't know what kind of doctor somebody is. But that trust piece of it is really what is most important to the patient, and that's where security is part of that trust. And again, you have to earn that trust. And I think the same is with any other sector, whether it's a surgeon, whether you're driving a vehicle on the road, which has a lot of electronics and software in it nowadays. Grew up on a farm in Kansas. Tractors were GPS guided 20 years ago, right? This stuff is in everything, and so part of the idea of embedded security, again, is trust and making sure that these things work. So just in quick closing here, I want to just thank you guys all again for being part of this, right? Helping ensure that people can trust systems, that our systems are safe and secure, and getting involved in this area of work because the U.S. is dedicated right now to bringing back microelectronics here to the U.S. There are plenty of jobs that are opening up, and this is not a overnight opportunity to fix what we're doing. Some of these problems and challenges were decades in the making, and it's going to be decades in the solving. So back to we need more of everything. Again, thank you guys all for being here and the work that you're doing. And I'll just close again with, please bring your friends. My colleagues and I will be here today to talk to you more about any of this work, whether current work or if some of you are actually interested in getting into medical systems, happy to chat with you more about that as well. But thank you all very much.
So up next, I want to introduce Fritz Stein. Fritz Stein is a senior cyber operations engineer at MITRE, and you probably know him as the other flag icon on Slack who's helping out with all the tech support problems. So with that, Fritz Stein.
Hey everyone, it's great to be here. I see a lot of familiar faces so far, and a lot of familiar names. It's been a really good last 3 months, and excited to see what everyone has come up with and done. But I'm going to give a brief overview of this year's competition and go through some of the highlights of what teams were doing this year. And for all of the competitors, this is probably going to seem like information that you've heard, information that you're very familiar with at this point. But we also want to make sure that everybody who isn't as familiar or is new and joining us today understands exactly all of the hard work that these competitors went through with this competition. So we also want to recognize all of the schools that we had this year. This competition wouldn't be possible without the support of our returning schools, all of our new schools, support from high schools as well as colleges and universities, and our returning champion from last year, Carnegie Mellon University. So, as has been mentioned by Ben and Ben, this is a unique competition design. This isn't similar to lots of other competitions that you see. What makes this competition so unique is both that participants have actual hands-on access to the hardware. In most competitions, this just isn't possible, and that the competitors have such an extended period of time to do this. This competition requires serious effort. The amount of effort is similar to that of like a full college credit course. As such, a lot of competitors actually receive college credit for this course as the competition goes on for longer than 3 months. And this competition also allows competitors to explore both the defensive and offensive side of embedded security. Students get to create a secure design, and students get to attack all of the other competitors' secure designs. Our competition kicked off all the way back in January this year. On January 18th, we started what we call the design phase. In this phase of the competition, teams have to design and implement all of the different security requirements and functional requirements that the organizers set out for the competition. The earliest that teams could be done with that and move on to the next phase was all the way back in March 1st. And that begins what we call the attack phase. So once a team has finished their design, they can submit it to the organizers. We provision all of these different packages for them, and they can start attacking each other. At the end of that attack phase in April 19th, teams are basically here where they are now. We got to see all of the different attacks that happened. We're going to get to hear from all of the different competitors. So all the way back from January, the competitors have been working really hard. So what do we give teams to make this challenge possible? Well, we give them these functional requirements. These are different elements of the design that teams actually have to implement, and we test that they're actually working. We're given security requirements, so real-world security implications on these devices that teams need to actually come up with unique ways to solve to protect themselves from other competitors trying to attack their designs. We give the teams real hardware to work with. So for this year, teams received 3 devices from Analog Devices, these Max 78,000 development boards. Teams actually receive a working reference implementation of this to help get you up and running and going quickly. Teams get an automated testing service so they can see whether or not they're able to move to the next point of the competition. And teams get support from the organizers, Ben, I, and the rest of the team, which probably everybody has seen my name pinging them at some point in time asking for something if you made it here to the ceremony. So what was this year's competition? This year's competition was called the Medical Infrastructure Supply Chain Security Challenge, which is a long name, but this year's competition was really focused around the ideas of medical security and the ideas of secure supply chains for these components. So teams were given these 3 boards. The different boards were all put into this breadboard to come up with this final system that simulated a real-world medical device. One of these boards acted as an application processor, as it was called. That board interacted with other chips that were being simulated by 2 more development boards that we called the sensor and the actuator. This system altogether was made to represent an insulin pump in which values of blood sugar were fed to the application processor and then turned to the actuator to open and flow and control the flow of insulin into the blood. So teams had to address multiple different security concerns with these devices. Teams needed to make sure that all of the components that were part of this medical device were authentic and were secure. Teams needed to implement a solution for the integrity of the communication between these different chips on the bus. Teams needed data security, so they needed to be able to store data on these chips securely. And teams needed to be able to replace broken elements of the system in a secure manner. And in order to make these possible, we came up with the functional requirements for this year's competition. So this year, teams had to implement 5 different main functional elements. The first of those being what we called list components, which is a system that tells you what chips are installed on this device, and then a test component, which was a function that teams had to implement, which returns some secure data related to the manufacturing of the chip. that could be used to compare against whether or not that chip was valid. Teams had to implement the functionality for replacing one of these components, whether or not it was broken or just needed to be replaced. Teams needed to be able to turn this medical device on. So if the medical device was starting, all of these different functions had to happen before that point. And once it was turned on, there was a secure communications channel provided by the teams for these different devices to interact with each other. So what did teams have to address as far as security? So we gave the teams some discrete security requirements. If you implemented these properly, you were theoretically safe in the attack portion of the competition. The first of these requirements was that the device should only turn on. So when you actually turn on the device, if all of the different critical chips and application processor are present and they are valid chips. So you wouldn't want a medical device to turn on if somebody had tampered with it in any way. So in this picture here, we can see we have 3 good chips. The device says, I'll turn on. And this one of them is missing. The device shouldn't turn on and malfunction. And one of these, the chip is broken and or replaced by an attacker. Additionally, teams needed to implement a system for sending the secure component data and replacement data. And these were privileged actions. So these had to be unlocked with a PIN. So in this picture, we can see a person interacting with the system, giving it a PIN, and this being properly handled and unlocked. And teams were able to extract this. That would also give them flags. So the PIN should all remain confidential was another security requirement. And then finally, the communication channel between these boards, which we call the post-boot communication, should not be able to be forged or duplicated by an attacker. So if you have a running medical system, you want this to not be able to be tricked in any manner. Teams were given these in a number of different packages. That this was actually what made up the attack phase, and this is how they were able to attack each other. So thank you all for this overview, and I'll hand it back to Ben.
Thank you, Fritz. So now we'll move on to the fun part of the day, which is the team presentations. So first up, I want to invite the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, or as they go by, SIG Pony. Currently at the end of the scoreboard close was in second place with 26,000 points. There are still points to be awarded, so positions could flip, but with that, I'll hand that over to UIUC.
We're UIUC, and we're advised by Professor Levchenko at our university. This year, we had over 40 members in our team. We're very open to students participating, so we invite as many people as we can to join us on the process of building our secure system and learning as well. And to support that, we have 14 leads as well, and the names in green are our presenters here today. So first, the design phase.
All right, I'll talk about our design methodology. So one of the most important points of what we did is we did not write any of our implementation code until we had a fully audited design proposal. So this made sure that we had a properly designed protocol and that there weren't any vulnerabilities at that level. And then after we'd created that, writing our code was much easier because we had an outline and we knew what a reference should look like and how it should perform. So because we had such a large team, we split into 4 subgroups. So our first group was our pre-boot. So those 3 functions, the list, replace, and attest, they were responsible for. Then after that, a lot of these functions relied on our secure communication layer, not just for post-boot. So we created a secure communication team, which was responsible for booting the board, and then also for our what's called our hide communication protocol. And then also, we had implemented our design in Rust, so that created some difficulties building. So we created a build subteam, which handled executing the C code that was provided to us for post-boot from the organizers, that our secrets generation on the host, and creating a Rust hardware abstraction library. And finally, we created an attack sub-team to get a head start during the design phase. So we were researching hardware attacks and also researching how to build exploits for the insecure example, as many teams tend to reuse components from that. So also, we did all of our project organization on GitHub, as shown here. So an overview of our design is we chose to use Rust, which was really cool because White House guidelines later supported this decision. And our HIDE protocol, which was the secure communication protocol I mentioned earlier, we used ASCON 128 authenticated encryption. So this performs, instead of just simply sending messages, which is vulnerable to replay attacks, we create a three-way challenge response handshake to ensure that the messages are also fresh. So together, these prevent forging and replay attacks. And we also make use of delays. So in some cases, we use constant delays to prevent enumeration brute force attacks. Then we also use random delays to deter hardware attacks such as side channel analysis and fault injection.
Yeah, so as Jake mentioned, the HIDE protocol, instead of simply just sending an encrypted message, we do a three-way handshake. So in order to begin the message communication, the sender will first send a request to begin the communication, and the receiver will then send a random encrypted challenge nonce in response that the sender must decrypt in order to validate that the message is secure. So as you can see in this diagram, we first send a request, and the component will respond with a challenge nonce that the sender needs to decrypt and solve. And since we generate a new challenge nonce per communication, these messages can't be replayed or forged because the challenge nonce won't correspond to the correct solution. Yeah, and so this ensures that our communications are authentic, encrypted, and it preserves message integrity.
So as we look back at our design, there's a few improvements that we came up with. One of them being the use of key derivation functions to prevent key reuse. Another improvement we thought of is, I guess, to add more random delays, and this prevents anti-glitching. This improves anti-glitching. And additionally, another thing that we saw in the attack phase is that if the component gets compromised and you're able to gain access to flash, dumping the flash, it can expose some flags. So we can reduce the impact of exploits as you don't need to store flags in plain text and encrypting the flags there. And also the use of MPU, or memory protection unit. Now for the attack phase, I'd like to talk first about I2C component. So this attack, in the component side of things, the I2C was implemented in software, so we were able to cause a buffer overrun that allowed us to rewrite or overwrite the interrupt vector table, which we could add some shell code to, which basically dumped the component flash code, just component flash. And this exposed some flags, but this only compromised the component. And that's where our attack number 1 comes in, or our next attack comes in, which Min will talk about.
So first, I'll kind of provide an example of what exactly we're attacking. So here we have a valid design between the systems. So we have an AP provisioned with 2 components, component A and component B, each with 2 different IDs. Now, suppose component B becomes damaged, so you can no longer use it. So a technician will order a new component, component C. But if you can see, the AP is still provisioned with the previous 2 component IDs. So the technician needs to run the replace command to update the second component to the new component. Now that the technician has done that, the device is able to boot. But the attacker's goal is compromising the supply chain and providing a false component. And our goal is to get the AP to boot despite an unauthentic component being installed. So one simple solution that a lot of teams implemented was to add a validation step, and that uses a very simple shared secret key. So both components should have a symmetric key which is installed, and the AP also has this symmetric key. So the AP will send a validate response, and then the component will send some sort of secret response that validates that they do have the key, and the AP can verify that. And then, so these validation steps verify the components know the secret key before they boot. So if, in our case, the evil component does not have the secret key, so it's not able to provide the correct secret response, and therefore the AP cannot boot. So this is a very simple solution. However, as mentioned earlier in our tag 0, we had an I2C exploit. And this expected specifically the component. So before the AP turns on, or before the AP sends any messages, from our evil component, we send our exploit with the payload to extract the secret key. And then the component is exploited, so now it's running our own code, and it sends the evil component that secret key. And now, the evil component has the secret key. Now the AP turns on, and it runs through the validate steps, and we're able to boot the system. So this is what a lot of teams implemented. This was the most basic attack. But some teams implemented a better solution, which is to use unique secret keys and host signatures. So in this case, in order to properly have a proper system, you have a unique key, so a key for component A, a key for component C, and then you have a signature from the host build process, which is based on a combination of the key and the component's ID. So you have that validation step, and then it boots. But in this case, with the evil component, we don't have a valid signature. We can provide any key we want, but we don't have a valid signature from the host. So in that case, we're not able to progress with the boot process. And if an attacker were to use the I2C exploit, they would get the key of component A and the signature for component A. But that runs into the problem that now you have two components with the same ID. And so this causes bus errors because of this component ID mismatch. That led us to think, like, well, let's just look at the replace code and see if we can do anything with this. So this is just kind of a basic summary, but the summary is that the code does not check if the component ID is already provisioned. So in other words, an AP can have two provisioned components with the same ID. We have a new problem, which is that if two components have the same ID, they'll have the same I2C address because the I2C address is derived from the component ID. So the attacker's fix is to use the simple I2C exploit to disable component A, and our evil component will handle both validate requests. So here we have an evil component with the same ID as component A. It will send the I2C exploit. It will steal the key and the signature, and then it will disable, or it will have the key and signature now, and then it will disable component A. And then the AP turns on, and the evil component handles both validate requests, and then finally boots the entire system. And yeah.
Okay, so this is the first time our team really attempted hardware attacks. The goal is to obviously do a fault injection to skip instructions in the code with a voltage glitch. We utilized the chip whisperer that we bought for this year's challenge. And obviously the main challenges with doing this is obviously that you need to pull the voltage to ground. If you do it too long, then it's going to cause a power reset, obviously. There is precise timing that you need to meet when you skip instructions. And obviously, these decoupling capacitors are here to sort of remove noise, and that's just not something we really want. we have here a picture of the chip whisperer that we were using to perform the attack. And then this oscilloscope really shows an example of what this voltage glitch looks like. And you can kind of see the little dip there, and then it's going to go back up with the voltage level. That's where the sort of glitch happens, and these kind of happen in pretty short bursts of time. Over here you can see a diagram of the coupling capacitors that are highlighted in red, and you can also tell that these capacitors are really tiny. So this is another challenge, is trying to desolder that, which that was a fun time. Yeah. And here's a picture of our setup of us attempting to do so on one of the boards here. In summary, if you could skip a single instruction in the code, what would happen? So essentially, most teams didn't really have protection for this type of attack, is what we saw. The voltage glitching can just really let you bypass a lot of the security that you would need, or that would happen with some of these devices. The most easiest defense is obviously the RAN delays, right? Delays of RAN time. And this would allow in which you really don't know where you're going to be with the glitches, where you're going to sort of skip the instructions. And also doing the multiple if statements and conditions is really to abstract the attacker from accessing certain portions of your code.
So real quickly, some other attacks, you can do brute force on the attestation pin if the team does not implement like a constant delay. A lot of teams also had bad communication schemes, so you could easily read messages over the wire or replay messages. And that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Nice job on the hardware attacks. I'm very surprised. When you do the hardware attacks using this chip whisperer light, because I do accidentally have one on my table as well, how do you figure out the board schematics? Like, where did you find the data sheets? Because we are basically based off on the user manual and their thing, but we need to find their actual schematics and how do you exactly remove the capacitor and the components? Because if you mess up one thing, the whole attack board is done.
Right. So we didn't actually implement any hardware attacks. This was our setup, and we were trying to do a proof of concept. We weren't able to actually perform any fault injection on the actual boards. We're kind of too chicken to desolder the capacitors on those. But this is, because this was our first year doing anything like this, so we really wanted to spend the initial time to learn how these attacks work and try to implement them, and we'll definitely be doing them next year.
Where did you find the schematics?
Oh yeah, those are just on Analog Devices website. If you go to the download information section, there's a PCB schematic that you can find. But yeah, so I'll just go back real quickly. The wiring diagram shows the 4 capacitors on the voltage for core A, which is the ARM core. And so those have the capacitor numbers. And if you reference the PCB schematic, you can kind of you can actually control F for the component, the capacitor number, and then you can find that there.
We also used Rust for our design this year, and I was wondering, we had a few kind of, since the design was kind of intended to be in C, we kind of ran into a few major difficulties. I was wondering what big difficulties you guys had this year.
Yeah, so one of the big difficulties we had was the boards this year have only flash. So last year we had an EEPROM chip. This year we only have flash. And the way flash works is you can only write one way, ones to zeros. And because of this, when you're writing to Flash, you can't also be executing instructions from Flash because otherwise you'll get like a hard fault. And so we had to basically learn how to write linker scripts to run some instructions for writing to Flash from RAM instead, because in that way you're not reading instructions, you're not executing instructions from Flash when you're writing to it. But that's more of a board-specific thing. In particular, we spent a lot of time because the organizers provide post-boot code in C, and our design is in Rust. So we had to do this Rust-C interoperability. So what we do is we build the post-boot C code first into assembly language, and then we also, in our Rust code, we write the libc functions that because the post-boot code just happens to use the standard library, so we have to implement those handlers in order to make the board work. So this is more of like you have to learn how the linking process works and how linker scripts are written in order to get your Rust code, your C code to find the Rust code, and then it will compile into something that works.
Up next is Delaware Area Career Center. Delaware Area Career Center was the first high school team to compete in the eCTF. The eCTF was originally designed as a competition for colleges because it's a hard competition. And in 2020, they came to us asking if a high school compete. We said, sure, if you're ready. And first year, they made it to the attack phase. Second year, they came in third place. And we're always excited to see them come back year after year. So without further ado, Delaware Career Center.
Good morning. My name is Bo Schwab. This is Andrew Langen, and this is Samuel Goodman. We are from Delaware Area Career Center, and our team is all juniors. We have worked hard these past few months to build a secure medical device. First off, these are the algorithms that our design uses, which we will be referencing throughout our presentation. For symmetric encryption, we used AES in counter mode. For authentication, we used HMAX with SHA-256. For asymmetric operations, we use elliptic curve cryptography over the SecP 256R1 elliptic curve. And finally, we use SHA-256 to hash secrets. Now let's talk about the architecture of our design. The first change we made from the example design was to add compile time secrets to each device of a deployment with compile time Python scripts. In the deployment folder, 4 separate elliptic curve key pairs were generated as shown above. The corresponding public and private keys were included only where necessary. Next, an AES key is generated to encrypt the @test_station data during the component build process, which is stored using a wrapper key diverted from the pin. Finally, a global HMAC key was generated to be used during the post-boot communication protocol, but we'll have more on that later. Moving on to the AP build process, a similar Python script hashes the replacement token and the pin, and it uses the pin to hash to wrap the @test_station AES key. For the component build process, the @test_station data is padded to 64 bytes with zeros, and then it is encrypted with the unwrapped @test_station key. The unwrapped key is never stored on the board. Another major feature of our design is our changes to the I2C protocol that the boards use to communicate. In the reference design, the boards communicated with 6 different eCTF I2C registers. A possible flaw in this design is that a malicious AP could specify an invalid length in one of the length registers or write a false done status to the done registers. To mitigate this potential flaw, our design removed the use of these registers and instead is packet-based. All transactions are initiated by the AP and will use a common packet to format phrasing and receiving data easier. All packets have a common header which includes a checksum to verify the entire packet was received, and a magic byte is designated using the type of packet. The AP sends a packet padded to 256 byte, and inside of the ISR on the component side, a callback is initiated to respond based on the magic byte of the received packet. By using clock stretching, the component can respond to every request before the I2C function returns on the master side, so we can remove polling the done registers as well.
So the first functional requirement that we will highlight is the attestation function of the application processor. In our design, we stored the hash of the attestation pin as well as the wrapped key for the attestation data on the AP. The wrapper key is computed as one iteration less than the stored pin hash. We also stored the attestation data in an encrypted format on the component. To retrieve the data from the component, the AP sends a packet consisting of a signature and a number for which the attestation data is being requested. Once the component receives a request, it responds with the attestation data in the encrypted format. The AP then validates the data, is signed to prevent decryption oracle attacks before displaying it. Our design does not add an additional delay for incorrect pin attempts. Therefore, the pin could have been brute force without extracting the pin hash from the board. To mitigate this, we could have added a delay after an incorrect attempt. The signature sent to the component can also be reused across deployments because the attestation packet is deterministic, which could lead to replay attacks. For the replace functionality of our design, we did not make any changes compared to the reference design. Instead of storing the replacement token as is, it was stored as a hash. We wanted to implement a validation system similar to boot, although we deemed it unnecessary as the component would lack the required compile time secrets if built by an attacker. The key space for the replacement token was significantly larger, so no additional protection measures were required regarding constant time comparison or built-in delay in the competition environment. The next functional requirement that we will highlight is the boot process. The first step of the boot process is to perform a key exchange for the secure communications channel in the post-boot environment. Our design implemented a simplified version of the modern-day TLS. First, the AP randomly generates an elliptic curve key using the onboard true random number generation hardware, which it sends to the component. The component responds with its own public key and a shared secret is calculated. Next, the shared secret is hashed, which we use to derive the encryption nonce, and the key is used in the post-boot communications channel. The first 16 bytes of the hash are used as an AES key. The next 8 are combined with the hex string to perform the encryption nonce. To form the actual boot packet, 32 random bytes are generated using the TRNG hardware and signed by the AP. The component verifies the signature of the same random bytes and the component's boot message. The AP then performs the same process for all remaining components stored in the flash and then finally boots itself. This approach meets the security requirements of requiring a device to only boot if all of the devices are valid by using mutual signature validation. The weakness for this approach is that all components in the deployment have the same key. If the TRNG engine failed due to any physical attack causing it to return a predictable value, the signature could have been forged. To mitigate this, our design could have included unique key pairs derived from the component's ID. The last functional requirement that we will highlight is the secure communications in the post-boot environment. Using the encryption parameters negotiated during the boot process, the data to be sent can be made into secure packets. A session nonce is initialized at 0 and incremented for every transaction pair. To create the decrypted payload, a magic byte is combined with the length, the current session nonce, the data to be sent, and the padding. The HMAC is computed over the payload using the compile time HMAC key and appended, which prevents the payload from being modified during transit. The entire blob is encrypted and then sent to the destination. Altogether, combining these various security features provides a secure channel which we can guarantee authenticity, integrity, and confidentiality, but not without weakness, as CMU was able to prove with 3 hours left in the challenge. Our implementation does not have a full packet key infrastructure, which could have potentially protected this aspect of our design. During the key process exchange, the public keys are sent and not signed by another key pair generated at compile time. This could lead to man-in-the-middle attacks during the key exchange process. Combining this primitive with extracting the HMAC key from the flash or an arbitrary HMAC primitive would lead to complete control of our post-boot communications protocol.
Moving on to our favorite attacks, we would like to highlight an attack on one team's random number generation. In this team's design, they have a key generated randomly during initialization that is securely sent to the components. The key is stored in the G/N key variable on the AP and encrypts all data sent with AES. The problem with the key generation is that it depends on randomness from RAND. On an embedded system, the call to time is not implemented and will always return -1. This means the seed-ran call will always produce a deterministic output. On the component side, the key was recovered by simply copying the AP code. Once we had the key, we were then able to decrypt all commands sent between the AP and the components. Another problem would lie in using RAND for randomness due to RAND not being cryptographically secure. The output from a properly seeded RAND could be easily recovered with enough keys. Our solution would replace all the calls to seed RAND and RAND with calls to the onboard TRNG hardware, which does provide enough entropy to make recovering the keys generated infeasible. Another attack that we enjoyed, although unsuccessful, was reverse engineering an exploit binary. On the day before the challenge ended, a team accidentally shared a supply chain exploit binary called UConSupplyDump.image in a public channel. The binary proved to be successful for the team that shared it. After looking into the binary, it appeared to be written in Rust. Not many teams used Rust, and sadly, Rust is harder to reverse engineer than C with my personal favorite tool, Ghidra. The binary was in a proprietary format to be uploaded directly to the board, so there were also no symbols or helpful metadata embedded in the image. Looking into the binary, it exploited the I2C library provided in the reference design using the length and the done eCTF registers. The exploit would not work against our design due to our new I2C communication protocol. If we had more time to reconstruct a version of the exploit, I believe this would have been a successful attack vector against many teams. Overall, we learned many important lessons throughout this competition. One of the most important parts of a secure design was having robust compile time secrets. The designs that we were unable to attack all had sufficiently random secrets embedded in their designs during the build process. We did try to extract them using memory bugs in a few reference design libraries, but without having any debugging symbols and blindly guessing as to function locations within memory, we were unsuccessful in being able to find suitable return addresses. Getting shellcode to run was also difficult for the same reasons, even though most binaries had GCC stack buffer overflow protections disabled, and the shellcode would have worked otherwise. Additionally, the unique quirks of embedded systems made developing for the challenge difficult in some aspects. Developing at a low level for specific embedded systems depends heavily on SDKs built for the specific board, many of which have different functional interfaces. A major bug for us came about when we were reworking the I2C communication protocol, and the solution we found was buried in the 400-plus page user guide. Thank you all for listening about our experience with this year's challenge, and we hope that you all learned something new. Above is a link to our GitHub repository with the code for our design, as well as all of our LinkedIns, so feel free to connect with us. We apologize for a poor font choice, but they are supposed to be all lowercase, and with that, we're now open for any questions that you may have.
Back at the beginning, I saw you guys listed quite a few different cryptographic protocols. What was your thought process in choosing those specific ones?
Yeah, so for the AES and counter mode, we chose that one specifically because the encryption and decryption process are the same. So that would serve to reduce the size of the binary on the board, which would help us to meet the firmware requirements. And then for the HMAC with SHA-256, as well as just plain SHA-256, that was in the cryptographic library. We used Intel's TinyCrypt library, and those were the default algorithms for the hashes, HMACs, and for asymmetric operations with elliptic curves.
Thank you. In this same thing, you use a elliptical curve for asymmetric key. For what is the rationale to use this asymmetrical key? And the second thing is that you were talking about the fault injection in the RNG. Like, what exactly you mean the fault injection? Is that the same thing that you talked about, the attacking vector? That the same thing?
Oh, so to answer your first question, for asymmetric operations, we chose elliptic keys because they have much smaller key sizes for key pairs, which would help us to meet the firmware requirements. And also, during our secure send and receive, we have to exchange keys, and we chose to do asymmetric because If you only have 2 public keys, you can't derive the secret. But if we use symmetric algorithms, if we sent those keys, once they have the symmetric keys, they would be able to decrypt everything. And then can you ask your second question again?
Second question is you talked about the random number has some fault injections that a fault injection during RNG. Like what exactly you mean the fault injection? Like that's
Yeah, so with physical access to the board, there could be some way to make the random number generation engine fail and generate a predictable value. And if that happened, then the signatures would be much weaker because they would already know the random value associated with them.
Do you know how to do the fault injection?
I personally don't, but I'm sure some other teams could probably do that. Before we go, we just want to thank everyone at MITRE Engenuity and the MITRE organizers for this amazing opportunity, as well as Mr. Cochran for assisting us throughout the competition.
Thank you, DACC. Mark Halfman is the director of the NEMC, and he will introduce our next speaker.
Great. Thank you, Ben. Hello, everybody. As Ben mentioned, my name is Mark Halfman. I'm the director of the Northeast Microelectronics Coalition Hub. The hub is funded through the U.S. CHIPS and Science Act, specifically the Department of Defense Microelectronics Commons Program. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker from NSTXL, the director of the Microelectronics Commons Program, Stephanie Lynn.
All right, good morning, everybody. So I'm kind of glad that you guys put me after the high school presentation. I also went to a high school where they actually encouraged that kind of stuff. I actually specialized in EE, the EE track there, but I did nowhere near what you guys are doing, and I will say it's quite impressive. When I got out of that high school as a senior, what we did was we programmed a bunch of, PIC 16F84As. It was so traumatizing, I remember the part number, in assembly to do blinky lights, right? And that's what we did. Obviously I continued that track through college, and then got my graduate degree, also continuing with the same focus area, computer engineering, with a focus in hardware security. So everything you guys are doing is really, really near and dear to my heart. One of the things that I really loved about all of that was actually programming in assembly. So a lot of people hate that, I think, but I feel like I'm within, a family here because I think you all love doing that kind of thing. So I feel validated, right? I feel very seen. I will say I'm really happy to see that there's so many different schools, so many different. I think some of you are actually international as well, and I think that's great because it truly represents the semiconductor workforce. I speak from a microelectronics perspective. That's what Microelectronics Commons is. And semiconductors being the backbone of just about every technology out there, they're a critical core piece to all of this, but it truly is a global supply chain. So I think it's really important to see that there are others also included in this audience. But I will say that, it's great that all of you have chosen this path. I think there's a lot of great reasons to choose this path. And I'm standing up here now representing, some of the management and the execution of some of the big dollars that are now coming out into the United States ecosystem to help ensure that our workforce components are being supported for the future industrial base that we're building. So this is where I throw out some of the big dollar numbers, right? You've all heard CHIPS and Science Act. The CHIPS piece of that is $52 billion. Commons itself is $2 billion, and then NEMC Hub being a part of that. We've also got other workforce funds, right? We've got NSF, we've got NSTC, the National Semiconductor Technology Center. There are tons of initiatives going out right now to really support you guys and to help ensure that we can support you along this workforce pipeline to lead you into the career paths that you're going to choose. So why are we doing all of this? I'm going to throw out some stats. There was a workforce report put out last year by the Semiconductor Industrial Association, SIA. They said that within the next, I guess, 7 years or so, by 2030, we're going to be looking at an increase of about 33% of that semiconductor workforce. That's a lot. That's 115,000 jobs within those 7 years. However, 58% of those risk going unfilled. Now, that's pretty huge. That's more than half, right? Now, of that, 39% of them are technician jobs. So not even necessarily full 4-year degree positions. We also need those certificate and 2-year degrees. 35% of those are your 4-year degree engineers. Engineers and computer science majors, I should say. And then 26% of those are engineers at a graduate level, so master's and PhD. So you can see that it spans the gamut, so you do not have to go through a full 4 years in order to be a part of that demand signal, to fulfill some of that demand signal, right? And so that's great seeing some of the high school folks getting involved in that, because I think it's really important. It means you have a variety of different pathways. Given college is so expensive nowadays, not everybody has the luxury to access some of those resources. So, you know, there was another study. This one was, well, some of this was informed by the Census Bureau in 2021, but anywhere from 30 to 60%, and maybe even up to 72% of those of you that graduate do not stay within a STEM career path. That's huge too. So it's not even just about getting you guys through the academic pipeline, it's also about maintaining that throughout your careers as you continue on. So what does that mean? We got to hold industry accountable for that as well. So, you know, looking at all the industry members, what are you guys doing for retention? How are you keeping some of these students, some of your workforce within those technical career pipelines? So then how do you all survive through this? I mean, the industry's been changing. I think we've heard of, you know, you know, all the layoffs, the hires and the layoffs through the pandemic. I mean, it's been quite a ride for some of those folks within the community. So how do we really kind of maintain that resilience? So I'll share some of my mantras, I think. I'll get a little personal here because I do actually live by some of these. And I think it's really helped me sustain through all the changes that have happened. You know, going from somebody that thought I was going to work in a lab for the rest of my life, being a double E, to somebody that ended up working on helicopter programs for the Department of Defense. I worked on defense policy for hardware security, and now here I am helping to execute and manage the Microelectronics Commons program. So it's quite a gamut of experience in my past. But I think especially nowadays when things are changing so much, one of my favorite sayings is, a jack of all trades is a master of none, but oftentimes still better than a master of one. So I think most people have heard the first part of that, but a lot of folks I talk to do not know the second piece to that. So it's not to say don't be an expert in your field, but don't forget everything else while you're pursuing it. And be adaptable, right? Pursue skill sets that are adaptable. Also, be the poorest house in the richest neighborhood. What does that mean? It means surround yourself with people that know more than you. Don't be afraid of that. If you are the person that knows the most in your room, you are not growing, you are not providing an environment in which you can grow. Don't close the door if you don't have to. I do this all the time in just life things, but if I don't have to make a decision, I won't. I try to wait until the very last second because you never know when something's going to change in your life that will actually change the decision you're about to make. And then finally, knowledge is key, understanding is powerful, but people are influential. So, you know, I think it's fantastic. You guys are all doing great. It's very impressive what you've learned and what you're showing up on this stage. I also don't want you all to forget that it's not just about what you know, it's about the new ideas you can create, the innovation that can happen with what you know. And then finally, that people piece, don't forget people. Now that can mean a bunch of different things, and I can spend forever talking about that one, but at the end of the day, it's the people that make the decisions, and so you have to know and understand that landscape in order to be able to navigate it for any pursuits that you are trying to advocate for. Right. So, also don't forget on that people piece that everybody that you interface with is a real person behind that, right? So you might be engaging them day to day on just, hey, this project thing, hey, we need to work through this, but hey, that person might need to go to a doctor's appointment by 5 p.m. or before the bank closes at the end of the day, they have other things that they're doing at home. So I do want to close with a quote from Maya Angelou. I loved this quote. She says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And that's something that I feel like, especially as I go in the community, you re-meet people over and over and over again. And they'll always come up and say, "Oh, hi, I remember you, from back in the day when we did X, Y, and Z." So don't forget that while you all might graduate from your high school, your universities, whatever it might be, even throughout your career, you will potentially meet some of these people again. So once again, congratulations to you all for being one step closer in becoming part of our technology workforce. And I look forward to speaking with some of you. All right, thank you. And thank you for inviting me.
All right, so next up before lunch, we have 3 schools. We are going to start with Purdue University. So Purdue is a 4-time competitor, and they are one of 2 teams this year that managed to make it through the entire attack phase with no flags captured.
I'm Jacob, this is Jack, and yeah, we would like to present so these are sort of the people that are here today at the award ceremony. But we definitely have a lot more people that are on our team at Purdue, up to 17 students and 3 advisors, who have all been sort of very helpful at every stage, from sort of protocol design to sort of binary analysis and ensuring sort of side channel. And yeah, many of them couldn't make it today, but we're all sort of very grateful for their help. Just going a little bit into sort of the design phase at a high-level overview, is that we essentially we, very similar to sort of what UIUC had talked about, we sort of followed a similar approach of ensuring that we sort of had the protocol design all sort of figured out before we even sort of touch a line of code. And sort of in tangential to that, we had also sort of, we had spent a lot of time trying to ensure that whether we wanted to use C and Rust, and sort of once we had just sort of decided on Rust, we followed an approach of trying to implement the hardware abstraction layer and I2C communication, and as we will see later in the attack phase, that proved very useful and influential. So just going a little bit into some of the design goals and the overview of what we had sort of done, is that as a general approach, we sort of have a host computer who talks over UART to the application processor, and the application processor interacts with sort of the different components, component 1, component 2, sensors and actuators and such over I2C. And in conjunction, the application processor, component 1 to 2, comprise the medical device. And there are a number of attacks that we sort of considered in this process. Is that first, a host computer can provide malicious inputs, such as providing incorrect pins or other tokens. We can have eavesdroppers who have physical access to the medical device and can look at sort of the component data and potentially sniff things out from over the wire. And we can also have malicious either application processors or components who can essentially act as counterfeit and pretend to be a valid device, and we want to prevent, to make sure that doesn't boot in order to prevent having a malformed or broken medical device. So going a little bit into sort of each protocol, we have the test protocol here, which essentially what we do is we first send over the pin over UART, by the user, and the application processor takes this pin, hashes it, almost like you would a password. So we use a very slow hash function to make sure that help prevent brute force attacks, and we also include a small bit of random private salt to prevent dictionary attacks and essentially make it harder to brute force the hash function. And so the way that this pin is verified, essentially, you pass in the pin, you hash it, and check that the hash is what you expect at the end. And then we sort of, similar to UIUC, we implement a challenge response protocol, where the component sends over a challenge, and the AP computes essentially an HMAC value that responds to that challenge, including the CID, which includes the I2C address that's being communicated over. And this essentially helps authenticate to make sure that the AP is who they say they are. And then once that's done, the component sends back its encrypted attestation data, which might contain personally identifiable information. So we encrypt it and authenticate it over the wire to make sure it can't be tampered with or decrypted. And the AP, who is the only one who in our system who has the key to decrypt this attestation data, then decrypts it and sort of provides that. And yeah. So going a bit into the replace protocol, basically the only thing that it does is similar to the attest protocol. It sends over the token that is essentially acts as a pin in a similar sort of way. But it also sends essentially a before and after component ID to replace on the AP. And this sort of replaces the AP on the provision device. But wait, how do we authenticate? Oh, we authenticate it actually in the boot protocol, not the replace protocol. Essentially, basically what happens is the component one and the application processor engage in a two-way challenge response, very similar to the attest protocol. And the way this kind of works is, essentially to check that who they say they are. And this time we use digital signatures as a part of this process. To make sure that you can uniquely identify the application processor from the various components. And this helps ideally prevent some of the attacks that UIUC had talked about, for example, of being able to, this essentially helps distinguish component one from component two to make sure that you can't have a single component on the device who is uniquely validating essentially both components in some form of sense. So and the AP and the component essentially wait to verify each other so that at the very end, the only way to actually successfully complete the boot process is by having all components and the application processor successfully verify each other. And and once it's done, they all sort of send a boot message. As for the post-boot messaging protocol, this also works relatively similarly, where we sort of have the, in this case, this would be the component sort of, actually this would be the application processor trying to send a message. So the component essentially sends a challenge for the AP to use as their nonce. And as well as the sort of message that they want to send, and then they sort of sign that to ensure that the application processor is identified as the one who has sent that message. And we sort of have this challenge response kind of process to ensure that signatures cannot be replayed and sort of used in a later message by an attacker who doesn't know the private citing key. This helps identify the specific AP or component who's sending a given message, and to ensure that, for example, like an actuator on a medical device can't pretend to be an insulin pump, or components to make sure that they can't pretend to be an AP, and so on. The application processors make sure to verify the signature, and so just in sort of recap, some of the security features that we designed around. We have a sort of password system, which we salt and hash with a kind of slow hash function, bcrypt, to make sure to essentially help limit brute force attacks. And we include this random salt value that the attackers is sort of securely kept privately in Flash to ensure that both offline and online dictionary checks are difficult to perform. We also implement our own hardware abstraction layer in Rust. We essentially rewrote the entirety of the firmware that was provided to us in in secure design, and this helps ensure memory safety by default. We include build time encrypted data, where essentially the attestation key is only stored on the AP, not the components. This prevents, even in the event of a catastrophic compromise of all the keys in a component, this makes it so that even then an attacker is not able to decrypt the attestation data. We ensure that the attestation data is not directly stored anywhere inside to be leaked. We also engage in compile time address randomization, essentially a weaker form of ASLR. where we randomize the memory section offsets to frustrate attackers and make it more difficult to exploit buffer overflow or similar attacks to run shellcode inside it maliciously. And we also include random delays and repeated checks in critical sections of our code to prevent against fault injection, timing and glitching attacks, and so on, to make it harder to skip verification checks and so on. So just as a sort of design summary, we include a nice little bit of syntactic sugar and Rust to provide memory-safe code by default. We spice it up a little by adding some salt and pepper to the hashes to make them slower to compute. We make sure everything's nice by sort of verifying every side to make sure everyone's behaving as they should. And oh no, we added a little bit of extra design code, which might have made it insecure. Actually, no, jokes aside, we sort of noticed with about a week left in the design phase, we were considering adding additional custom crypto to provide secret sharing so that to make very, very sure that all components and APs need to be distinct in order for them to boot. However, we decided with only a week left, it might have been a bad idea to roll around crypto. And so we decided against sort of actually implementing it after all. But if we had more time, we definitely would have considered that. And I believe CMU had actually come up with a similar idea for doing that. But yeah, in addition, we also could have done a two-way challenge response or sort of for post-boot messaging or make it sort of more like a traditional TLS style protocol, which sort of includes unique sequence numbers and sort of session data for sending messages back and forth between the AP and the components. We also could have considered activating the memory protection unit to ensure that the stack memory is non-executable and to make essentially make buffer overflows harder by sort of treating the memory and the code as distinct. And finally, we also could have considered running stronger memory hard hashes, such as Argon2ID, to provide better side channel resistance and also make it harder for attackers with access to like GPUs, FGPAs, and ASICs from being able to run hash functions quicker, essentially make it so that running these hash functions brute force on a small pin, make it so that that essentially is limited by memory accesses, which are very slow. For attesting to the pin. And and with that, I will sort of hand it off to Jack to describe a little bit about the attack phase and some of the attacks that we had done.
So I guess our main attack that we used for probably like 90 to 95% of our flags we got was the interrupt handler and the reference designs I2C, or the buffer overflow and the reference design I2C interrupt handler. So basically the interrupt handler, it has some section of code that runs when the I2C transaction starts, and it also has some code that runs when the transaction stops. But the problem is, you can see the little snippet of code, it checks the MXC I2C stop flag from the like interrupts, the I2C controllers, registers flags, but the stop flag is only run whenever a stop command is sent. And the I2C also has a thing called repeated restart, where you can start another transaction without stopping the previous one, which means you can basically run start transaction code without running stop transaction code. So this is a little like example. So first, we start a transaction and we start another one. So we write some bytes, so the write index goes like, we write into like a big buffer, like the receive register, which is like 256. So the write index is like some number. Then we restart the transaction, so write start gets set to true above here. And when write start is true, we can switch the register. But since the stop code has not run, the write index is not zeroed, so we can switch from a big register to a small register, and now the write index in the big register is out of bounds of that small register, and you can see there it does length minus write index, and then that's cast to an unsigned when you send a read RX FIFO. So that'll be a negative number, and then it'll turn into a very big positive number, so you just write a ton of bytes. So yeah, so basically we write some, that's kind of like the diagram, we write some bytes, and then we switch the write index, and we get a buffer overflow. And we overwrite a pointer in the interrupt vector table. And so then this is how kind of what we did. We we wrote past the received done register. We wrote a NOP sled, some shell code, and we started like spamming an address somewhere in the NOP sled, and eventually it hit the interrupt vector table. And then the shell code basically dumps it all over Flash, so like a Python script we have. And the supply chain, we have something that dumps it over I2C back to a component, which then prints the whole Flash base 64 encoded. Some potential improvements, we could have used a bigger NOP sled. We also could have automated it a lot more, since it was like a race, because like 3 teams had the exploit. So yeah. Potential impacts, we could get like most teams' components. Suggested countermeasures, you just patch that bug or run your own interrupt handler. Others, we exploited a protocol flaws like replay tokens, and some teams had boot authentication, which had a challenge response but no component ID. You could just relay it to the same component. Protocol, yeah. Since I'm running out of time, I go fast. Another attack. We investigated like dropping the low insulin packets and only sending the highs, but since the way the post-boot code was coded, it sent a message then received, but if only polled, some designs, including ours, would have been vulnerable. But since the way it like wrote into the buffer the value and when it switched over, it wasn't really exploitable. What we learned, focus on getting infra set up and also reading the rules very carefully because we had to like redesign replace since we didn't realize that. And it seems familiar to last year's slides too, since we had the exact same thing. I guess we didn't learn as well. Then, yeah, final comments. I think it's try to be faster. We were a little delayed in the attack phase. I guess, yeah, thanks to like all the organizers and the participants. It was like a great time. So I hope to see you next year.
Is it on? Oh, hi. So my question for like the presenters is how long did it take for you guys to basically implement your protocol? How was like the procedure process for planning?
Right. I think both of us could probably speak a bit on that, but yeah. So actually, a lot of sort of the protocol that we had designed was similar in some ways to our last year's design, especially regarding kind of hashing pins to make sure of that sort of thing. And so we were actually able to carry on a lot of the sort of conceptual work that we had done from previous years. So implementing the protocol-wise, I'd say it probably only took about 2 or 3 weeks to get an initial design that we thought matched the security and the threat model specifications. However, as we sort of started actually implementing the protocols and the code, we kept running into concerns and sort of issues that we weren't really sure whether or not it would sort of be in scope for actually releasing the flags, since there was we were trying to figure out essentially the parity between the flags, essentially what would release the flags versus sort of what the high-level security design, trying to actually parse through, what exactly was in scope versus out of scope, and trying to essentially formalize the details of, trying to actually get the technical details of the security requirements actually took a good deal of reading through the rules, rereading through the rules, and a lot of iterations through the protocols. So yeah, I would say that took probably 2 to 3 weeks, and then once we started implementing the protocols, Jack and I kind of both realized that there were a lot of things that we sort of had to change even up until like the week of handoff. I don't know if you want to speak more on that, but yeah.
It was basically just like, we realized since the flags, they're only in the data, like at first we thought like the bootloader would release the flag when it like detected the data was printed, but so then we realized we can like encrypt the flags all at build time, and that's what we did like somewhat for the component, but we were also going to do some like other wacky ideas with all the components and APs needing to be there. But we didn't have time. But then we also had to like redesign the replace protocol because we didn't know that it couldn't communicate during replace. So yeah, it probably took like it was fully done in like 6 or 7 weeks.
So So the vulnerability that you found and you exploited for most of the teams, how long did it take for you to kind of figure that one out? Was that something immediate that you focused on separately with your team, or is that something that you found as you were going along?
Kind of took us a while. Like at first, during the design phase, it was like the interrupt handler, it was like kind of sus, but so there were like some race conditions, but we couldn't fully figure out a working exploit. And then during the attack phase, we noticed the CMU was getting like the flags really fast, and it seemed like they could always get stuff from the component, but maybe not the AP. So we looked more at the component, and then eventually we realized if you could skip the start code, you have a big buffer overflow. And then we also, like a few days later, realized that the repeated restart allows that. And I think also rewriting the whole thing in the Rust helped, because we wouldn't have known about this repeated restart otherwise, because it's like a subtle I2C detail.
Thank
So
you
I think
so
it was
much.
like 13 days after we entered the attack phase.
At the beginning, what fraction of your team actually knew Rust? Was it everyone, or did you have to teach some people, like hands-on during the design phase, how to write Rust?
I probably around like 1/3 to half of our team, I think, knew Rust, but well, actually, I don't know for sure.
Probably like of the proportion of people working on development, like a half maybe.
Yeah.
Something.
So we had a sizable enough team that it was relatively feasible to use Rust instead of C, but that definitely is an important consideration. I agree that it's like, if last year, sort of the reason, for example, we didn't use C was because we only had 1 or 2 people, myself included, who knew Rust, and we didn't want to overload, just 1 or 2 people to just do Rust design, or like to spend many weeks spinning up trying to teach people Rust. So we sort of had the people who didn't know Rust do other things on the team, like look for bugs in the insecure design code, or sort of working on protocol design instead.
Thank you.
Next up is Michigan State University. Michigan State is in their 3rd year competing, and they actually came to the eCTF after a Delaware Area Career Center alum went to Michigan State, bringing the competition with them. So it's great to see them back, much to the chagrin of our founder and UMich alum, Dan Walters. Michigan State.
Hello, everyone. So our presentation is actually not that heavy on technical implementation details, but we're Michigan State University, and I'm Utpav, he's Felipe, Samai, Krish, Radhe, and Charles. And we thought it would be a fun idea to go over the design thinking process and more of the iteration part of how you receive the technical specifications, look at the design, and see where to build up from using rudimentary cryptography principles. So everyone knows the goals, and we're going to focus on the communication part, which is the 2 main things that the boards have to do is verify that they're all legitimate before booting, and post-booting, they have to have secure communications, which means that all messages must be valid, and they must ensure the authenticity and the integrity. So you don't want a third party tampering with them. And so what we were trying to do in this presentation is we'll start from a sort of rudimentary idea of what's the most basic cryptographic primitive you could start with to design a secure boot communication protocol, and try to build up from there, spotting out different flaws and attack vectors in the process, and see how you could exploit those as well. So starting with idea 1, do you want to explain that?
Yeah, so the first thing a lot of teams thought about, and it makes a lot of sense, that's the first thing you can think about, is when you're doing a secure communication, you can think about creating some type of password or token that you're going to verify on both sides, right? You're going to send from the AP to component, you guys are going to check if that is right, and that's all good. But obviously, things are not as easy as it seems, so one problem we have is, what if someone stays in the middle there, just copies it up, and replays that after, right? What if they just create some type of AP or component using that leaked token that was passed by a past type of transformation or a past type of communication that was happening with the boards, right? So we think, okay, how can we fix that problem? Well, let's start thinking about something more security-wise that people think usually, which is cryptography, right? Let's start introducing cryptography. So what if we introduce some type of asymmetric cryptography? We introduce public key and private key in the AP and the component. They use those two to communicate to each other. In that way, we know that, well, every type of communication that is in between there is going to be confidential, right? Other people should not be able to read, and we should be safe, technically speaking. Well, the problem with that will be, well, we never thought about how can we, like, ensure that those boards were good in the beginning itself, right? We just ensure that once they have their keys, they can talk to each other, and everything is confidential, everything is good. The problem is, we never ensured that the keys itself were allowed, like those boards were allowed to be there anyways. So what if I am an attacker, I create a fake component, and I just create my own key, and I try to talk to the AP? Well, it will work. We're just asking for you to use keys. We're not asking you to use a good, the key we want, right? So that is the problem. So, well, now let's make sure you're using the key we want. Third idea. Oh, wrong button, yeah. So, let's now start trying to store those keys that were created for the component, for the AP, into the boards, and then checking for each case of each device. So for example, I have AP, component 0, and component 1. I'll create a key pair for each of them and save in the other ones, right? Like AP will have its own, component 0 and component 1. Component 0 will have AP, component 0, component 1, and all of them will have all of the key pairs, and they will check. Well, we also have another problem with that, which is we have a thing in this competition, which is the replace. We have a replacement type of feature that we don't know what are the provisioned devices from the beginning. We only know the starting ones. But what if new ones are added in the future, right? Like what if a new type of device is added 10 years after in that medical device and we need to connect it up? Well, we don't have that key. We would need to rebuild and recreate the whole system. So that doesn't work. And that is the biggest problem that we have here. We cannot do that in that order. We don't have a way of saving all of those keys in build time, right? So we go to our fourth idea.
And fourth idea 4 is where we introduce certificates. So we know that APs and components will all have public keys, and they'll use a challenge response to verify each other to actually prove that they own the keys. But now we're trying to make sure that the keys they have are attested to by the manufacturer, and they're not just random key pairs. So what we can do is give the manufacturer itself a key pair, a public key and a private key. And what the manufacturer can do is sign the component's public keys with its own secret key. And then we distribute the manufacturer's public key to every device in the MISC system. So instead of needing to know every public key of every other component in advance, what a component or an AP can do to verify another component is simply check the host signature of its component's public key. And then it can proceed to verify the actual ownership of the key using a challenge response. So this sort of adds a level of indirection, and it makes it a two-step verification process, you could say, where we first actually check that the component public key is provisioned by the host by checking the host signature, and then we check that the component actually owns the key by doing a challenge response. So this sort of wraps up the key verification aspect. But now we get a new problem. After booting, an AP needs to establish a secure channel of communication with all components. And our main goal is to ensure two things, integrity and authenticity. And we could continue using these public keys to encrypt messages for the other end, but that introduces a problem because it's mainly inefficient to use asymmetric cryptography for that sort of thing. And instead what you could use is authenticated encryption. In our case, it was SHA-SHA-20 poly 1305 to detect if message packets are tampered by a third party, and how it does this is by including authentication codes. And we also introduced message IVs, and by combining those two things. You could also home roll it by just doing like a key to HMAC, but those sort of things, when you try to roll your own crypto, there's bugs can creep in. So authenticated encryption is sort of a packaged deal of like, you get encryption and you also get authentication both in the same package. But this now presents a new problem of how do we actually get that key for symmetric encryption across the devices? And this is technically goes beyond the requirements of the competition, because we don't need security or confidentiality in this case. We only needed to check that the messages were not tampered. But we decided to go with encryption anyway because it's a stronger guarantee, and it also just the authenticated encryption protocols are standardized instead of having to roll something ourselves. So one approach we can do is idea 5, which is where we have the other side's public key, so we can take our one side generates the encryption key, it wraps it up using the other side's public key, sends it across, and then the other side decrypts it using its private key, and now both sides have established a shared symmetric key that they can use for encryption. Now, this is theoretically secure, but one potential problem that pops up in the real world is that this does not provide forward secrecy, which means that we're hinging the security of our design on that key remaining a secret. Because let's say there's an attacker or a man in the middle, which is collecting all packets that are being sent between these two devices. And even if they're not immediately able to like decrypt the contents, if in the future there's a compromise of the AP's private key, it can go back, reference these packets, and then decrypt them to figure out what the symmetric key was, and then all subsequent communications just fall like dominoes because you figured out what the communication was, encryption key was. So, in idea 6, what we can use is a Diffie-Hellman key exchange. And this is a very common illustration used on Wikipedia, where instead of using public and private keys, you sort of represent asymmetric cryptography using mixing paint, which is you have a common paint color, and then you have secret colors. And how paint works is that if you mix colors, it's pretty hard to tell what colors you started with if you only have the end result. And so in this case, Alice and Bob, they have two secret colors, but when they exchange them, they exchange the mixture of them with a common paint. And then this way, both of them can arrive at a shared secret that was derived completely over public communication, nothing was encrypted, yet someone who's observing this from a third-party standpoint cannot derive what the same shared secret was because they kept the shared parts private and only shared the mixture of the colors. So this is what it looks like in the form of our handshake. So we add an additional component, which is the ephemeral DH keys. And the reason we use ephemeral keys is because we could just use fixed keys for both APs and components, but that means every time they do a handshake, they will arrive at the same shared key, which means that across deployments maybe, or if you exploit one handshake, then that means all other communications are still vulnerable. So if you really want to go for forward secrecy, what we need to do is make sure that the paints or the keys that we use for the key exchange are random each time. And that's why we call the keys ephemeral, which is where they're generated for each handshake, and then they're disposed of after the session ends. So now we have forward secrecy, and at the last part you could see there's like a secure encrypted message with K that says dispense insulin. So that could be an example of something that's sent between the component and the AP after encryption, after the handshake. And this seems secure, but there's an unaddressed flaw here, which is we've ensured that messages between boards are encrypted and they can't be tampered with because the authentication code will be invalid and the cha-cha-20 upload 1305 decryption will fail. And they're confidential, which goes beyond the security requirements, which means no one can even see what the contents of the messages are. But there's a flaw here, which is that there's no protection against replay attacks. Because even though we're ensuring that messages are not tampered with and that they're confidential, nothing stops an AP or a component from capturing a message from a third party from capturing the message between an AP and a component and simply resending it 10 times. So if you have an insulin pump that says, dispense 10 milliliter of insulin from the AP, we could simply capture that, replay it 10 times, get 100 milliliters, which is probably not good for the patient. So this was an attack, and to do that, we didn't actually do it because of lack of time, because we had to construct a board which could act as both an I2C peripheral and controller to act as a man in the middle. But the way we can address this is simply adding a counter to our authenticated encryption and keep track of it on both ends. So the AP keeps track of a counter, which simply means the latest message from the component, and the component does likewise the other way. And the way this provides security is if they receive a message that is less than or equal to the last value of the counter that they kept track of, the message is refused. So this way, any packet that tries to be replayed is rejected because every subsequent packet needs to have a higher counter value. And this was essentially our final handshake design. So we exchange keys and certificates. There's a host key which attests to the legitness of the AP and component keys, and then the components and APs
verify ownership of their keys by doing a signed challenge response. Then we exchange ephemeral Diffie-Hellman keys, which makes sure that the shared secret they derive for encrypted communication is not traceable in future if there's a leak of the keys. And then we use a counter to make sure that there is no replay attacks. So this is what our design looked like, but how did it fare? Well, not pretty well, because the two flaws in our design were we completely overlooked the I2C buffer overflow error because we were not looking too deeply at it, and we decided to go with the reference implementation. And our components and AP firmware had the keys in plain text, which means if you use that I2C buffer overflow and dump the component flash, you will get the keys as part of it. But I think we're pretty satisfied with how we came up with the design and just the overall design thinking process, which is why we wanted to do a walkthrough of it. And yeah, that's pretty much our design. So does anyone have questions?
We just wanted to say thank you to our advisors, Dr. Yuan and Adrian, and all our team members who couldn't be here today. Thank you.
Slight change of schedule and actually break for lunch now and then start with University of California, Irvine after the break. So we now have an hour break for lunch. I believe lunch will be served out in the atrium where you walked in, or in the hallway. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Hope you had a good lunch. Next up, we have University of California, Irvine. This is their third year in the eCTF, and I believe they are traveled the second furthest distance behind the team from Morocco. So with that, I will bring them up.
Hello guys, we are the team from the Wild West, the Bug Eaters from University of California, Irvine. Our team leader is Peter the Bug Eater, who is still in San Diego Zoo right now, and it's an anteater. And this year, the school consists of 6 undergrad as its core. My name is Jin Yao, and John is working with me on the algorithm team. This is Zuhair, and Zuhair is working with Sung Hao, who is an emeriti member who actually cannot be with here today. And those are from the software, who is Zhang Hao and Richard. And our advisor is Professor Ian Harris. The outline will be talking about the design and attack phases and our future directions. So this year, we designed the key exchange protocol that leverages its multi-party computing techniques to establish a shared key for 3 authenticated parties to establish a secure communication channel before AES even started. This mask-on key exchange verify protocol will ensure 3 components synthesize a key, and given that none of the masks, as you can see, are 0. So what happened is that AP initiates the process by generating 2 random numbers and randomizes the key share. So does the component 0 and component 1. Those established ones uses, if you can recall, XOR cancels itself out. It's a Abelian group. So the thing will be masked over and over with 3 communication on each side. The final key will be synthesized as key 0, key 1, and key 2. Those 3 are masked together. The process will be initiated every time if a board powers up. So authenticated board cannot even finish this key sync process, nor the attacker can choose to switch board in the middle or recycle the power. It is proved mathematically, this is by Shannon's theorem. This is actually equivalent to the block cipher that cancels out 50%, so it's perfectly secure mathematically. Next, we will have Zuhair talking about our communication protocol.
Thank you, Jin-Yao. So, after the key exchange process, all devices now share a symmetrical key. With that, our communication protocol begins. We split the protocol into 2 sections, pre-boot and post-boot, that use 2-way handshake and 3-way handshake protocols. For clarity, handshake in this context describes some combination of challenge response protocol to verify the authenticity of the device and the integrity of its message. After analyzing the different ways an attacker can obtain our flag, we decided to build a 2-way handshake protocol for our pre-boot commands, and that's because the AP is the only device that requires authentication from components. The two-way handshake can be described as a challenge response protocol using a random number as the verification nonce that is generated by the AP and is later verified in the response message from the component. However, for post-boot, both the AP and component require authentication. So we decided to build a three-way handshake that consists of the same challenge response protocol idea, but with an additional message to authenticate both sides. For encryption decryption, we decided to stick with WolfCrypt as our cryptography library. While developing our design, we mainly considered these three main attacks: brute force, replay, man-in-the-middle attacks. For brute force, we added a 3.5-second delay between every attempt to protect against the operational pin extract scenario. For preventing replay and man-in-the-middle attacks, we added a random number that is generated by the board's TRNG to ensure the uniqueness of the ciphertext of the messages, and we also added a time frame window that would deny any response, even if it's valid, after a few milliseconds to ensure the freshness of the message. Unfortunately, as you can see in the last section of the slide, we did not consider side channel attacks, so we were unsure if our protocol is truly fortified. Our protocol's fortification was impenetrable by those three attacks. And we just found out today that there's also another vulnerability, which is the I2C protocol. Next, Jan Hao will talk about weak crypto and weak design.
Thank you, Zuhair. So in terms of replay attack, in terms of attack, after investigating some schools' designs, we have found some vulnerability to perform replay attacks, which is also we got 80% of flags. As you can see in the graph, those teams will have their firmwares validate the authenticity of each other by combining the firmware keys, also the firmware tokens, with other kind of messages such as attest command or attestation data into this binary message flow. And when the receiving firmware receives this message, it will first verify the firmware key, also the firmware token, before it will proceed to any other kind of process command or process response. However, although the firmwares are randomly generated, they are static once built and are sent in plain text, which leaves the vulnerability. So what we did is we replaced one of the firmware as ours, and which is built on their code, and we extract the message sent from the real firmware and isolate the firmware tokens out. And with that authentic firmwares, we can build our own malicious firmwares, either AP or component, and send any commands we want to the real firmware. And that will get acknowledged by the real firmware because we do have the authenticate firmware keys. And that's how the replay attacks works. And next, Inton is going to talk a little bit more about our brute force attack.
Okay. So brute force attack is one of the most simple but effective attack under two conditions. The first is the design must not have a lockout time delay, and also the pin has to be a reasonable size, right? For example, we're brute forcing the AP pin that's a 6 hexadecimal digits. That's around 16 million. That's not too bad, right? So as you can see on the graph, the expected value of the pin on a uniformly distributed model, which is in the middle of the upper and lower bound. And so if our strategy here is that we start from the middle, closest to the expected value, and then expand to the upper and lower bound. And since we have 3 boards we can run in parallel, this saves a lot of time. Well, this is only theoretically working, but in reality, so this guy, one night wanted to bet me which interval will the final pin hit, and guess what? Well, I know a little bit of ancient wisdom. It's the Chinese I Ching from 3,000 years ago. I know a little bit of the fortune telling in there. So guess what happened? Well, this guy owns me 2 Chick-fil-A's. Well, yeah. Yeah, so we're ready to move on to next year, and let's welcome Richard to talk about our plan for future.
All right, thank you, Anton. So to summarize a bit, our main attack approach was to construct a malicious component, or AP, to fool the real target components. This works quite well against designs that didn't ensure uniquely identifiable messages, or where the identity of a component could not be securely verified. Thus, the vulnerabilities that we mainly attacked were those where the only form of component verification was using the provided IDs, or where the communication messages were consistent, for example, if they weren't encrypted with a nonce. We also targeted PIN verifications that didn't include a time delay, and those could just end up being brute forced. Now, considering that we approached our design with these vulnerabilities that we identified, these attacks, at least in the ways that we considered them, would not have been effective against our own design. Going forward, we would like to address side channel attacks. These ended up being much more effective than we previously expected, and we'll try to perform and defend against them next year. At least that's what we thought when I wrote the script. As I've learned today, there are also many other vulnerabilities that we hadn't even considered, such as the I2C exploits, which just goes to show that there's always a lot more to learn, and you're never really safe, unless you're CMU. Now finally, we attempted, but were ultimately unsuccessful in setting up the hardware to be used as a man-in-the-middle attack, which is also something we'd like to attempt again in the future. And to close off, I would like to acknowledge the rest of our teammates that weren't able to join us here today, and they are Li Xiaocheng, Emma Xiao, Yusong Moon, and Li Zhongxuan. They were integral parts of our team and contributed immensely to our final design and documentation process, and we would not have been able to do it without them. Thank you.
Could you elaborate on the owing to Chick-fil-A thing?
Okay, here's what happened, right? So those are all already sleeping. We're like, okay, it's already like midnight, and CMU and all the other East Coast schools are. So we're like, okay, let's do it. And then we're like, okay, let's brute forcing it a little bit. And apparently this guy gets this weird eaching things out, and he's like, okay, the third one. I was like, no, it's expected value in the middle. I choose the second board. And it turns out he's right. He cracked 2 machines that night, and we got 2 flags from the third interval. And I was like, okay, sometimes, so there was always a saying that theory is when you know everything, but nothing works. And practice is when everything works, but nobody knows why. So this thing is like a theory and a practice combined. Nothing works, and nobody knows why.
I just wanted to comment. I really liked the way you illustrated your thought process, especially when it came to the cryptography.
Actually, that cryptography is it's invention by ourselves, and it was we are like really uncertain because by Kirchhoff's principle, because me and him are the mathematical persons on the team, so we are saying like, what happened if we use multi-party computing at this point? The original idea is that none of those 3 would have the same mask, and they will actually be generated differently, and then the mask got synchronized. That's a multi-party original idea. But for some reason, we cannot pass their testing services. So we have to like change it up a little bit. But wait for us, we'll do version number 2.0 next year.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Right, next up is the University at Buffalo. So University at Buffalo, if you want to come up, they're in their 4th year competing. And every year they have gotten higher up the ranks, so it's been great to see them come back and come back with a vengeance and perform better each year. Hand it over to UB.
So we are Team Cacti from UB, and it's my pleasure to introduce the team. Here we have Andy, Shi, and Gao, and myself, Afton Spiegel. We have a couple other awesome team members sitting over there, and our advisor was great help, Professor Ziming Zhao. It takes a lot of balls to get up here on this stage and make a presentation. Luckily, we're set. And without further ado, Gao is going to walk us through some of how we went through some attack and defense.
Hello, everyone. I'm Gao. So first, let's talk about our team's design. we used the monocipher library. This lightweight cryptography library provides encryption, decryption, verification, and password hashing. It is very nifty for embedded system development. And for authentication, we used the challenge response mechanism. The challenge is a random number generated by the true random number generator, or TRNG, on the board. And in this example, in the attestation process, the component needs to validate the AP. So the component sends the challenge to the AP, and the AP calculates the response and sends it back to the component for verification. The computation involves the challenge random number and the component ID, which are known to everybody. So there is a secret key shared between the AP and the component. And the security of the challenge response mechanism depends on this key. Okay, so now let's talk about our defense. First, we encrypted the sensitive data like flags. Most of the flags this year were embedded in the attestation data and boot messages. So for both the AP and components, they store the encrypted attestation data and encrypted boot messages. Only the AP has the key to decrypt and print the flags. So in this case, even though the attacker has the ability to read the flash memory or SRAM of a component, he or she cannot get the flags because there is no keys on the component side. So that is how we secured the flags of the black box scenario. Okay, so the idea of mitigating brute force attack on the pin code and replace token is to make the validation processes slow. We use the Argon2 keyed hashed algorithm. This algorithm is tailored for password hashing. So the computation speed is deliberately slow. To make it even slower, we introduced some random delays. And also, if a user supplies a wrong pin code, there will be a longer delay, and the delay remains effective after resetting the board. But interestingly, this year, the attack board does not support resetting. Okay, so sometimes an attacker could bypass some instructions by using the fault injection attacks. They need to find some triggers. So the triggers is something that they measure the exact timing of the instruction to be skipped. The triggers could be something like the debugging messages or the state changes of an LED light. So in our design, we just avoided using them. And also, we introduced random delays of several hundred CPU cycles to make it even harder to find triggers. And for some very important conditional expressions like pin code validation, we let the expressions executed twice with a random delay in between. So in this case, the chance of skipping the important conditional expressions are very low. Here are some other additional defenses. First, the memory wiping. So after using some sensitive data, like the keys, this part of the memory will be zeroed out to mitigate the data leaking vulnerabilities. And also, second is communication timeout. It is a defense mechanism for the replay attack and man-in-the-middle attack. The timer is started after sending a message, and the response must be received before the timer expires. So that is perfect for the challenge and the response mechanism. And third, for the pin code validation, the comparison time is constant. That means no matter how many characters in the pin code the user supplies are correct, the comparison time would always be the same. So the attackers cannot get the timing side channel information. Okay, now let's move on to the attacks. First, we used a brute force attack to get a lot of pin extraction flags. The idea is to use a script to try all the possible pin codes. The script uses the Python UART communication to communicate with a board. And here's our settings. Yeah, we can find, because we had 3 attacking boards this year. We did the attack in parallel, and we can find the correct pin code within 15 hours for the designs without delays. And also, we utilize the debug message, pin accepted, as the triggers for the script to let the script know when the correct pin code is found. Next attack is replay attack for the operational pump swipe. So we bought a logic analyzer to analyze the traffic on the I2C bus. So here in the picture below, here is the example of the data we captured with this analyzer. 0x81 is a valid and high blood glucose value. So if we replay this value on the I2C bus twice, we would get the operational pump swipe flag. And this replay attack works if there is no message validation or if the message checksum remains the same for a specific message. Here are some other attacks utilizing the design flaws. So first, some teams may misunderstand the meaning of deployment, so they choose not to include any secrets or use the same secret for all the deployments. In this case, if you build any firmware, whether it is an AP or a component, that will be considered valid in all the attack scenarios. Second, the predictable keys. So sometimes the key array is in the global variable, so the initial value is 0, that is predictable. And also for some other teams, their design intention was to generate the random keys. However, due to some implementation issues, their keys are not actually random. And another vulnerability is the weak validation. So instead of using challenge and response mechanism, some teams just use, just let the AP send a fixed validation token to the component to validate. But the problem is the token can be captured and then replayed. Okay, and in the end, we want to share about what we have learned based on the past few years of computation. So first, don't rush to submit your design. Last year, we were the first team to enter the attack phase. However, we had a buffer overflow bug, and our flags has been captured the most. And this year, we changed our strategy. We submit late, and we were trying to make our design more secure. And we secured most of the flags, and the defense points really helped a lot. And second, always encrypt the sensitive data, like flags. And also, if you want to use asymmetric encryption, use ECC instead of RSA for performance issues. And also, after the implementation, always check your disassembly code of the firmware. Use skidraw or objdump, whatever you like, to make sure the compiler doesn't do anything funny. And also, if you want to use random numbers, try to include as many entropy sources as possible, even though you are using a true random number generator. And the last but not least, utilize the hardware resources provided on the board. So for example, we have a TRNG this year, and we had the thermometer on the board last year, which can be served as a very good entropy source, but lots of the team didn't use that. Okay, that is basically what we have today. I want to thank MITRE for giving us this platform to have fun and learn, and also thank our advisors, Dr. Ziming Zhao, to give us this chance to play this game. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In your presentation, you said about using Ghidras and to do disassemblies to make sure compiler don't do anything like weird. And this is also for you for all the schools already. Are you able to find, like, for example, last year we did TIVA, and the TIVA has this assembly files immediately generated for you when you compile, but are we able to find any? Did you able to find anything, or like also did you able to find any weird compiler tricks that the compiler has been fooling around, like while you were designing?
You mean this year, or?
Yeah. Like, does the compiler do anything weird this year, or like no?
Well, this year, no. Yeah, but use this technique, you can always make sure that. So for example, sometimes you write the code like random delays or just the delays or the memory wiping, right? Sometimes you want to make sure the compiler doesn't optimize the code. Yeah, because this kind of optimization is, well, it's good for the performance, but bad for the security. It is not what you want. Yeah, I think that is a good idea to check the disassembly code of the firmware. But this year, actually, no, we didn't find anything funny. The compiler did.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
You earlier, I mean, I guess on this slide you mentioned using multiple entropy sources. In this year, what entropy sources did you end up using for random number generation?
Yeah, we just used the true random number generator on this board. So we didn't include it, we didn't include other entropy sources actually.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So let me add one sentence. So actually, after our first flag was captured by SMU in like 15 minutes, we were saw that they have the technique to disable the true random number generator on the board. So yeah, and it's always a good practice to combine multiple entropys. Like do not just trust any one of them. Yeah.
All right. Now, last but certainly not least is a 7-time returning team who, for the past 2 years, has come in first place with a truly impressive record. Carnegie Mellon.
Hello, I'm Anish, and this is Carson, and we're from the Plaid Parliament of Poning from Carnegie Mellon. So today we'll talk a little bit about our design phase, one of our kind of favorite design tricks that we did. Then we'll talk about the attack. By now you've heard about the I2C attack, but we'll talk about how we fully automated it to really get the time down. And we'll talk a little bit about some lessons we've learned over the past few years about how to run an effective eCTF team. So here are the big tenets of our core design. So the main thing, most important, was encryption at rest of every piece of data. Anything that could possibly be sensitive was kept encrypted at rest using as many keys as possible. We replaced the I2C implementation after finding that vulnerability with a custom hardened layer. We went a physical bit-bang link layer with extra checks to keep out attackers. We also added an encrypted wrapper to further resist any fuzzing against the system. To prevent replay attacks, we used random nonces with the board's TRNG. We were worried about potential attacks disabling the TRNG, so we combined it with a von Neumann extractor to resist against this. We minimized our external code surface. We actually ripped out the entire MSDK library and used only pieces of the library that we were confident that we had looked through. This led to eventually a system where we had read every single line of code, including the bits of libc that we were using going into our system. We avoided interrupts and asynchronous code at all costs. Nonlinear control flow can lead to stuff like race conditions and unexpected behavior. And to prevent fault injection, we used a lot of redundancy and random delays. So our big highlight of our design was our zero trust architecture. The way this started was a little thought experiment. Assume that the attacker has full code execution on every part of the system, say through a buffer overflow. How can we still defend some parts of the system? So for black box, this is easy. Since the attacker does not have access to the AP, we can encrypt all of the component secrets with a key only stored in the AP. For the operational pin extract and supply chain extract, we can go one step further and encrypt those keys with the pin, so the attacker needs the pin and the contents of AP memory to leak the keys. Pump swap is harder. If an attacker has code execution on any of the devices, they kind of inherently can tamper with the operation of the device, but we did encrypt the code to make it harder to analyze. This brings up the question of supply chain boot and damaged boot. Can we do something to require all components to be present in order to boot, even if the attacker has full code execution on the AP? And it turns out we can, using this method called the Russian encryption doll is what we call it, where we take the boot data in the AP, boot message, boot code, and post-boot communication keys, and recursively encrypt it with a key belonging to each component in the system. And this is not limited to only 2 components. We can scale arbitrarily large number of components. Next question is, since we can't distribute keys between build stages, how do we give each component a unique key? And it turns out we're able to do this by starting with a root key, which we generate at deployment time, and then the component key is the root key and the component ID hashed together using a key derivation function. This means that when we're building each component, we give it just its own key. An attacker cannot go back to the root key from the component key. But when we're building the AP, since we know the component IDs, we can pre-derive the component keys to encrypt the data in the AP. Finally, how are we able to replace components with this system? So since we have this root key that can be used to derive all of the other component keys, we can encrypt the root key with the replacement token, the token being long enough that even offline an attacker cannot brute force it. And we put this in the AP. So the AP during replace time uses this root key, derives all of the old component keys, unencrypts its data, derives the new component keys, and re-encrypts its data, and then deletes the plain text root key, only keeping it encrypted. This means that there is no possible way to decrypt the AP's boot data without either all valid components or access to the replacement token present. Now we'll talk a little bit about attacks.
Perfect, thank you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the big I2C vulnerability, which we decided to call I2C bleed because every vulnerability needs a cool 2-word catchy name. So as established previously, this is because of repeated start conditions. So the read and write indexes are not checked, and so this leads to a buffer overflow and thus arbitrary read and write of any memory past the I2C registers. So with this, we can write in some malicious shellcode, write a bunch of padding, and then write the address of our shellcode to the vector table to achieve code execution. So now that we have code execution, we need to make the code execution as useful and as fast as possible. So we use a 4-step process that works on both locally and supply chain. So step 1 is we flash the designs to the boards, and as soon as that's done, we start scanning the I2C bus to see the I2C addresses of the components. Once we know that, then we can use the arbitrary read vulnerability in order to determine what we read until the component crashes to determine the address that our shellcode should be placed at. Once we know that, then after a reboot, then we can inject our shellcode at that address, and our shellcode, which is pre-written, will scan through the memory and search for flags. So once it has found the flags, it will dump all of the contents of flash or memory near those flags, which generally includes the flags and as well useful keys. And so on supply chain, then this data can be sent back to the malicious component for dumping over a bit-banked SPI link, and locally, we can just dump out the data directly. So the beautiful part is that without looking at the team's code at all, or knowing anything about their design, we can apply this program and immediately get the flags and the keys as long as they're using simple I2C peripheral. So we did see a lot of very interesting and very cool defenses against this, even in the face of full component compromise that can help the system remain secure. So one notable one is having a certificate chain. So you give each component a ID unique certificate, which is signed with a key that's been destroyed. So even though we have full access to one of the components, we can't do anything with it because we can't make a new certificate. You can also encrypt the component attestation data or the boot message with a key that's only found in the AP. So even if you have the encrypted data, it's useless. And you can also use key pinning to assign unique keys to every component, though this does require putting some secrets outside the deployment folder. And you can also, unrelated to I2C bleed, do some other cool defenses that we saw from other teams. So there were challenge response handshakes on every message in the system to prevent tampering. You can rewrite the I2C implementation to be more secure and to not trust your provided libraries and avoid a different kind of supply chain attack. And you can also use hardware features of the board or puffs in order to prevent easy emulation.
So now we'll talk a little bit about kind of some stuff we've learned throughout the eCTF. We've been doing this for a lot of years, and I've personally been doing this for 3 years, so I've picked up quite a bit. So some things we've learned about the design phase is one of our biggest, something very important that we've done and that we tried to do last year and especially important this year was get everyone set up in the first week with the insecure example. We kind of got everyone the boards, some breadboards, and had everyone run the insecure example and play around with trying to attack it very early on. This made it that we can start development kind of ASAP. Something that I think we did a little differently than maybe some other teams is while we did not start our secure implementation before we designed our protocol on paper on a whiteboard, we had a lot of tasks that we could start in parallel with the security design. So it was things like scripting and automation, which made our development process far more efficient, our low-level communication stack, and even experimenting with cryptography libraries and primitives. All of this stuff, we were able to predict what we needed to do and start on it before we were done designing our protocol. And finally, this idea of secure by design is drive out the attacker at every possible point in the system. Redundant checks for buffer overflows, multiple layers of encryption, extra authentication layers, random delays, everything. In the attack phase, we found balancing between conventional attacks and novel attacks was tricky because sometimes it actually turned out to be more worthwhile to, say, optimize our I2C attack rather than spending that time trying to come up with a new hardware attack. And unfortunately, a willingness to operate at strange hours was something that we had to do. Coffee is nice. Finally, earning course credit through an independent study program helps to offset the time investment of the eCTF. A lot of us spent a lot of hours on this, and it helps offset that. Something I'm really proud of is we did a lot of cross-training. Our electrical engineering-focused students were able to study crypto and learn and actually contribute to writing the crypto protocol design. And our security-focused students were able to learn about electronics and actually get their hands on with the lab equipment. And if viable, each member having a full hardware setup, the boards, a breadboard, connections, is also extremely helpful. And finally, some kind of open questions / lessons learned. One is, how do you handle redundancy? We push hard to try to have redundancy within the team. Each task was assigned to multiple people, so we would not have single points of failure. But it is kind of natural that stuff tends to tend towards a few people doing most of the work, so we actively try to counteract that. And working on novel attacks require a lot of hours to work on. We probably spent dozens of hours working on fault injection. We got it to work on one flag. So this stuff takes a lot of time. And so sometimes things like optimizing our I2C attack, optimizing buffer overflows can be better from a strategic point of view. Finally, we'd like to thank some of the sponsors of our team as well as to thank MITRE for putting on this event. Thank you.
Question in the back. So your sponsors, what tools and resources do they provide?
We're based out of Scilab, which is a research institute at Carnegie Mellon, and the resources we've gotten is mostly funding to purchase equipment and funding for travel.
You mentioned turning off TRNG, the possibility of doing so. Like, how would you do that to a board?
We tried a bunch of stuff and we were not able to actually successfully do it. We tried things like applying G-forces to the board and trying to freeze the board.
Heating it up. Vibrating it, throwing it against the floor, hitting it with a hammer.
We basically took some spare boards and just beat them up in different ways, and anything we did would either completely kill the board or the RNG would keep chugging along. But as a theoretical attack, we were worried about it because someone came close to doing it last year, so we added this extra layer of protection, so to make it not possible. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello. Oh, sorry. So my question for you guys is, how did you guys manage to split up your teams, and what teams did you have contributing? Did you have one main team as like the wolf pack team that's actually working on everything, or did you have it set up between all of your students?
Or designer attack.
So in the design phase, we kind of had, so our team is 13 students for reference. We kind of split it up based on different segments of the system. So we had 2 people working on crypto library stuff. We had 2 people working on the low-level communications. We had someone work on a test. We had someone do replace and boot. And then all of these, we structured things in a way that each person can test their own component before the other components are ready. So we did things like we would shim out our crypto library so we can test the functionality and then just slide in the crypto library. And this allowed us to have everyone on the team be able to contribute to some portion that was assigned to them.
During the attack phase, it got a lot closer to the kind of core Wolfpack thing where we would have a few people that are trained on executing a few certain kinds of attacks really, really quickly. And anyone who is not doing the attack directly with their hands on the board or on the Slack channel, I guess, would be reviewing the code right next to them and coordinating where are all the keys, what are possible vulnerabilities in real time, like in the same room, interactively.
Also, how long did it take for you guys to figure out the scripting? Was it something that took like the first 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Scripting has been an ongoing process that basically up until the last week, we were optimizing our workflows. So early on, we assigned 2 people to look at automation for development. So we wrote a bunch of scripts to do stuff like quickly build the design, quickly flash the design. We had a bunch of issues with OpenOCD that we had to resolve, but even up until the end, we were still writing convenience scripts. We were automating more stuff. So yeah, it never ends.
Okay, thank you.
I had a question. So we also wanted to set up breadboards, so we had more people working at the same time, but I don't have any electrical engineering experience, so we had problems with getting the breadboards to function consistently, especially across different implementations. Was there any trick you guys had? Is something specific, especially with the I2C?
Yeah. We observed this problem too, and it was a pain. We noticed that we're pretty sure this is just wire length. The I2C bus operates at a frequency that is just high enough to be able to cause problems when your wires are not direct and point to point, and it will just randomly flip bits. And so as soon as we put the wires together as tightly as we could and made them as short as possible, then it worked like 99% of the time.
We actually ended up eventually, the PCB that MITRE provided, we eventually ended up cloning that and getting a bunch of those made. There are companies that will do it very cheaply, and that solved all of our connection issues. So that was something I was a big fan of from MITRE.
Thank you.
Anyone else? There's one over there.
Yeah, so you mentioned you purchased some tools. I know last year you mentioned you were using the Chip Whisperer Lite and like an oscilloscope. Were there any other tools that you decided to invest in this year that might help?
I don't think we used any new tools this year that we didn't use last year. Logic Analyzer, oscilloscope, Chip Whisperer, and just lots of microcontrollers. Yeah.
Our team actually bought a few microcontrollers to kind of like act as a man in the middle for I2C communications. Were there any like specific microcontrollers that you were looking at or using?
The Pi Pico is a nice one. That's my go-to personally. You can run like CircuitPython and stuff on it, which is a lot easier to work with for prototyping. Yeah, nothing.
It's also really cheap.
It's $4.
It's $4.
So we kill a lot of them, and it's cheap, and it's nice to work with. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Carnegie Mellon. So the eCTF is a big production, and we really cannot do it without the generous sponsors that help run this program. Along with NEMC, chief among them is our diamond sponsor, Fortinet. So representing Fortinet, I would like to invite up Doug Dos Santos. Doug Dos Santos is a cybersecurity strategist for Fortinet with more than a decade of experience in consulting, threat research, and pre-sales engineering support. He has deep knowledge in security obtained by researching past computer exploitation and mitigation techniques, as well as research on the newest anti-exploitation techniques and attacks, malware botnet research, and network and application layer evasions. With that, Doug Dos Santos.
Hello, how's everyone doing? Awesome, awesome. I would like to start by saying that it's an absolute honor to be addressing such a unique and talented group of individuals as yourself. The work that you guys are doing, watching you guys present and talk about it, has been truly inspiring for me. And it's funny because I was asked to give an inspirational talk, and you guys are doing inspiring, so thank you for that. So while trying to understand which topics would be a good match for you guys, and talking to Rachel, she said, yeah, anything about yourself, the work that you're doing at Fortinet, and the work that you're developing with MITRE would be a good match. And I was like, okay, I'll do everything. I'll talk a little bit about where did I come from, how did I started with computers, what am I doing with Fortinet, and the work we're doing at MITRE. So without further ado, I created a very short presentation about what was my career path and how did I get to be involved with computers at first. And that's basically the first computer that I've come in contact with was a Compact Desk Pro. At that time, it was very expensive. And my father, which is still a lawyer, he used to write all his stuff on a typewriter. And he bought this because some other lawyers were using computers already. And I really didn't understand at first what that meant and what was that capable of. And it came with the Windows 95, and the only thing that was actually usable was some silly games, word editing software, and some spreadsheets. So I didn't give much attention to it. I was playing video games at the time, and the only thing I actually used for it was to playing Minesweep, not much than that. And then a few months later, I come across the Hackers movie. I'm not sure if you guys watch it or not. It's definitely worth it. And at that time, I really got to really understand that this was not just one thing that was sitting on my desk. That could be connected to computers all around the world. And that really messed with me. I was like, whoa, this is something that can be really used to connect with other people, share information, share knowledge. And not only that, seeing the Hackers movie and the power that they had by their own knowledge and what they could achieve with that knowledge, it was something that drove me towards wanting to know more and research more. At that time, we needed to have a modem to connect to the internet. So at that time, I could only connect to the internet after midnight because we were charged on pulses. So the longer you were connected to the internet, the more you'd pay in your telephone bill. So my father only allowed me to connect after midnight, which generated a lot of fights with my brother because we used to sleep on the same room. So every time I connected, he was already going to bed. And we had one of those old mechanical keyboards. So yeah, there was a lot of fighting. Then once we connected to the internet, it was a very different world. Right? All we had available to us was bulletin board systems, which was basically kind of like a limited version of the web, where everyone that connected to the same BBS could, upload files, download files, read news, connect to each other. But there wasn't really much on that front. Am I pressing the wrong button here? Okay. So then I remember that it was, once I watched the Hackers movie and I started trying to understand a little bit more about the culture, what different operating systems there were, I felt that I needed to convince my dad that I had to install Linux on the Windows machine. And then I started working a little bit, trying to understand what Linux was about, what was the development languages were about. And I came across FRAC. Does anyone here know what FRAC is? Raise your hand. Okay, cool. So back in, I think it was in 1996 on FRAC 49, you guys are talking a lot about memory corruption bugs. So the paper that changed it all was the Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit by Aleph 1. So if you haven't actually read that, I would recommend you guys taking a look at that because it's a really good paper. I mean, it's the second instance of the mention of this type of research in the wild. The first one was an NSA paper from the very own creator, from the father of the creator of the Mori swarm. It was an NSA paper from 1977. So this is the second reference, actually, so I would recommend you guys to take a look at this. And before I can come to my senses, I was spending countless nights and days talking to IRC, on the IRC, on the Freenode server, on the FRAC channel, trying to understand what other vulnerabilities there were, what information was available, just trying to understand what was the extent of that. And I knew it was almost infinite, right? So I had a sense that it was, internet in the 90s was like, kind of like the Wild West, right? Because there was no security guards anywhere. Back in the 1997, 1998, we were still developing the stateful firewall. So Snort wasn't even a thing. You know, the doors were wide open. And it felt like the Wild West because there were no security guards and everyone had guns. So I had this feeling that everything could be done and everything could happen, by the way. So what am I doing right now? I'm working on the research and development organization of Fortinet. I'm dealing mainly with threat intelligence and threat intelligence reporting and some threat intelligence hunting on a global scale. And if you know a little bit about Fortinet, you know that we have more solutions than our sales engineers can count and can remember. But what that means is that there's a lot of threat intelligence from different parts of the operating environment. We have FortiGates, we have EDR from the endpoint, we have Sandbox, we have FortiWeb, we have SIEM. There's a lot of intelligence that comes to our data centers, and my main job is to understand exactly what capabilities these technologies have when it comes to their ability to expressing threat intelligence, right? Understanding specifically where they stand, where they need to be, and working with the product managers to advance the state of the art of the threat intelligence products. That's where the advanced comes from. And I'm also driving our research partnerships with MITRE Engenuity. So MITRE Engenuity has created a center called the Center for Threat Informed Defense, which is there with the sole objective to advance the state-of-the-art of cyber threat intelligence tools, techniques, standards, and methodologies. And the work that they're doing is truly transformational, right? So there's a lot of friction, and because I work with threat intelligence day in and day out, I see that there's a lot of friction when it comes to aggregating and making all threat intelligence actionables. You have blogs, you have Twitter posts, you have other social media information, and different types of information are coming, and it's unstructured. So my work is to get all that unstructured data and make sure that it fits into our products. So the work that MITRE is doing, and I'm helping them develop some projects, is what's going to make threat intelligence less friction. It's going to have less friction. So in a way that it's going to be easier for you to understand threat intelligence that is being generated. It's going to be easy to use that threat intelligence to embed in our products and make sure that our customers are actually protected. And why am I doing this? Because I want to bring awareness to the work that's being done at the center. Once I started doing the impact that the work that they're doing can impact on the general cyber defender tool belt, it was really transformational, right? We have a lot of projects that are making it very easy and very predictable to work with threat intelligence. So there's a couple of projects that I work with. One is a portal which allows threat intelligence analysts to curate, disseminate, and collaborate on threat intelligence that they are gathered once they analyze a specific intrusion. There are methodologies that will allow you to quickly understand and score your analytic on the specific technique. So it will allow you to specifically understand the robustness of an analytic, meaning how hard it is to evade that analytic. So that's why I'm doing this, and it really grinds my gears when I'm talking to cyber defenders that they are not really aware that there's a lot of tools, a lot of methodologies that can help them make the work really work. They can work better with these specific types of technologies and tools and techniques. That's it, guys. Thank you.
All right, and now we get to the fun part that we're all here for. All of you over the past 4 months have put countless hours, how many thousands of hours in this room have been spent on the eCTF. And we're here today to really celebrate the work you've all done. And we want to start by giving 3 awards that really recognize some of the outstanding work that certain teams have put into it, and want to reward behaviors outside of the traditional points system that we see as really representative of what we're looking for at the eCTF. So first, we want to give a special award to the top high school team in the eCTF. This is an incredibly hard competition. It's challenging for college students, it's challenging for PhD candidates, and to see high schools come back and go from 1 high school back in 2020 to 14 high schools now, we're looking to keep growing, is something that we really want to recognize. So without further ado, the top high school award goes to Delaware Area Career Center. Next, while most of the points in this competition were awarded during the duration of the competition and recognized on the scoreboard, there were a certain number of points that were generated after. And one of those types of points was for a poster that all teams were invited to submit. So on this Monday, teams came together to present their posters to a panel of expert judges from MITRE, our sponsors, and other folks in the community, in the expert community. And one team's poster really stood out, actually receiving more than 100% of the score with bonus points awarded. So with that, we would like to award the Best Poster Award this year to Purdue University. You could all come up. And finally, we want to award one last award to something that comes up occasionally in the eCTF, where basically everything in the competition is a fair game. You can attack hardware, you can attack the other team's code, but there are certain foundational vulnerabilities that have the potential to undermine the entire competition. And when these are found, we really commend teams doing the upright thing and reporting them so we can actually disclose these potential vulnerabilities to the greater community to make sure that these vulnerabilities don't have a broader impact. And one team went above and beyond, found one of these very early in the competition, and reported it, and we've gone through the proper responsible disclosure process, and we want to award this special award to Carnegie Mellon University. Before we reveal the final scores, I just want to go over some fun facts. So as we mentioned, there's a bunch of different ways to earn points in this competition. Most of them have been awarded during the duration of the competition and show up on the scoreboard. These are things like teams earning points during the design phase, teams earning defensive points for having their flags uncaptured, and team attack points. But this gray area here are the points that were awarded after the scoreboard. So both the poster session that we mentioned and for good documentation of submitted designs. So there's, as you can see, there's 46,000 points that are awarded after the scoreboard closed. So there's a lot of potential for changes in scores. You can see there are some interesting trends here with the scores over time. There were certain teams that were really fighting for positions. In particular, the race for second was very close with multiple places flipping, and the difference between second and third is closer than the number of points that remain to be awarded. Second, the race for fifth, I think, was actually the most interesting. There were a ton of teams that were vying for this, and the very last day, the last day from midnight to, well, midnight UTC to noon Eastern, there were, 4 place changes during the competition? And it came down to the very last hour where DACC pulled into first on the score, or pulled into fifth on the scoreboard. The excitement stays to the very last minute, and Nikki is always keeping her eye out on the scoreboard and commenting about how exciting it is. So with that, we'll move on to the third place. And third place and a prize of $2,500 is awarded to Purdue University. So second place and a prize of $5,000 is then awarded to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And then finally, first place, the grand prize of $10,000 goes to Carnegie Mellon with a dominant 41,000 points and 175 flags captured. Congratulations, come on. So for a final ranking of the top teams, you can see there was a number of positional changes. The top few stayed the same, but it was incredibly close with less than 2,000 points separating second and third. So this was incredible competition. This was the most flags captured by a long shot of any eCTF ever. Most points earned ever, and the most teams in the attack phase we've ever seen. In fact, there's more teams in the attack phase this year than we had active teams 2 years ago. So it just speaks to the growth we're seeing and the great work you all are doing. So with that, I want to hand this over to Dan Walters. Dan Walters founded the eCTF back in 2015 with a spring competition in 2016, and has helped guide and grow this program to where it is today. So, Dan Walters.
So hi, I'm Dan Walters. I wear a lot of different hats at MITRE, white hats, black hats. But I knew Ben would probably introduce me as the founder, but I always find that as kind of a weird, it sounds weird to me. It sounds strange because, number one, I don't know, something about founding sounds like I did a lot by myself, and the truth is I did none of this by myself. This was such a huge team effort from day one, but especially to today. And then number two, when I think about the starting this 9 years ago, it looked so different. I mean, we had 4 teams just in the Northeast here, and today, 90-some teams, international. I mean, I never would have dreamed that we'd go from where we were as kind of a pilot experiment in how do we teach embedded security to now what this is, where we have amazing high school teams competing head-to-head with you know, the Air Force Institute of Morocco, right? It's just mind-blowing where we've come to today. The award ceremony is always my favorite part. You know, hopefully you all enjoyed it today. I think we had a lot of great speakers. I loved hearing from the teams. That's always awesome, hearing about what you did, what you accomplished, and the passion that you talk about it with. It comes through so much in your talks. You can tell you get it. You get that this is more than just a game, right? It's a lot of fun, but it's also just really cool, and there's so much that you can do in this field. Seeing how, you know, both the hardware and the software and the mix between them and the interactions and how that creates these unique security issues, it's very complex and very hard, but hearing you all talk about it, you get that, and that's really cool to me. That and warms my heart to hear some of the stories about the things that you're all doing. You know, one of the teams was saying how they invested in equipment for their lab to be able to do more advanced analysis of systems. I love that, because even though you bought it for this competition, that's gonna stick around, right? You don't just do it for that. That's now gonna be used for years to come by other students as well to learn about these same types of issues. So I just love to hear that. I mean, obviously we heard from our sponsors today, which was great. Thank you again to our sponsors. I have a lot of people to thank. I've got a long list, so apologies for that. I'm going to get to. But hopefully you've all had a chance to talk with them and talk with each other. The discussions is always a great part. And if you haven't yet, the good news is that there's more time, right? Stick around after this. You all have admission into the library as well, into the museum. So take advantage of that. Stick around, continue to network and mingle and talk to each other. And that should be a lot of fun. In closing, a few more things I want to point out. I want to echo Stephanie and Ben's message from this morning. You know, I thought they did a really good job talking about the importance of why we're doing this, that we're trying to build a workforce that is really important to have great minds like everyone's in this room working on some of these challenges. And today, you know, the theme for this challenge was medical device security, which I thought Ben did an excellent job kind of highlighting some of the really key reasons why that's so important in having the trust in medical devices. And that it's true, and that's a really serious problem, a challenge that MITRE and others are working on tackling, where we need, again, more great minds to help tackle. But that alone would be enough reason, I think, to have an initiative like this to try to educate more folks in doing it. But the reality is that's just one area where embedded security is important, right? If you look back over the 9 years, we've changed the scenario every year. And so it's not just medical devices, it's, you know, critical infrastructure, it's, you know, automobiles, it's national defense systems. There's so many areas where embedded systems are just pervasive and need to be secured. And we need more folks learning how to do that and that are passionate. So what's next? I get that question a lot from folks after the eCTF. You know, whether it was your first one this year and you're saying, okay, that was fun, what's next? Or if you've done it multiple years and you're getting ready to graduate, you know, you want to know, okay, where do I go from here? And to that, I'd say keep learning. You've just scratched the surface from what you've done in this. This field is deep. You can specialize even further, or you can branch out. But there's so much fun stuff to learn. So keep learning. That's the easy answer, right? The harder question is, how do I keep learning, right? What do I do? And that one's a little trickier. Unfortunately, the state today is there's not a lot of university programs, certainly not a lot of high school programs that teach this material. And right, we're trying to change that. But today it's, except for a very few number of schools, there's not a lot of places where you can go and enroll in like an embedded security master's degree or even a bachelor's degree. So that's the bad news. The good news is it's starting to change, and I like to think we're part of that solution in changing it. We're working on building more resources to teach people like yourself. So that's good. So talk to us more after about some of those new resources that are coming out. Talk to our sponsors as well, because they're doing the same things. A lot of our sponsors do some outstanding training. Some of you have experienced, right? So continue to talk to them about other things that they're building out. And then some additional homework I'll give for you that can help you for learning. Do it again. Okay, so I think we've heard several of you that came up and said this wasn't your first time doing the eCTF. You've done it multiple times. That's awesome. And I think you know that every time you do it, you learn something new, right? Even though it's the same, we still call it the eCTF, it changes every year, and your experience is going to change every year. So it is worth doing again. Get your friends on the team, teach them, and prepare for it, right? We're in the off season right now. So go and prepare, get your team ready, get your club ready to do it for next year, and learn from each other. Okay, and I think one of really good ways to learn from each other is to build a club. So if you don't already have a club, look at building one. Look at the briefs that you all gave today. Go back, review those. I think someone said a smart person learns from their mistakes. A truly wise person learns from the mistakes of others. And I loved the team that had the humility to say, we actually had the same lesson learned last year. These lessons repeat, right? So go and look at what you learn and try to apply it next year, and then also look at what other teams learned and try to apply that next year. I've got some homework for faculty as well. So for the faculty advisors that are here or listening online, we need help. We need more curriculum. There's not enough curriculum teaching this material out there at the schools. So this is my challenge to you to go build that, first of all. And second of all, because I think, at least in this room, maybe that's not so much the case. Don't just build it, but if you've already built it or the new things that you're building, share it. Okay? Share it openly with others so that they can also learn from the resources that you're building. We're in the JFK Museum. I think it was JFK who said, "Rising tide lifts all boats." Pretty sure that's true. Don't look it up. He was probably talking about economics or something not as cool as embedded security, but I think it still applies, right? So if you have things that you found are good resources for teaching this, it will benefit everybody, the whole community, to share that out. So that's my challenge to you. For us, things that we're doing, so we have very ambitious goals in the years ahead here. Partnering with NEMC Hub and Microelectronics Commons, we've got goals for growth across the board, participation, but not just that, not just trying to bring in more schools, but also looking at who's participating, increasing diversity, increasing what they're learning, right? What is the educational impact, and trying to measure that. And then also where they're going, right? Trying to connect you all with good jobs and then the industries that really need your help. So that's all good news. Everything that you've come to know and love about the competition, we're going to get, we're going to improve, we're going to make it better, we're going to take it to the next level. But also, and this is good news for graduates who might be saying, I'm not going to be a student anymore, what can I do? Well, actually, I'll say for graduates, it's always been okay for you to go back to your alma mater and help out the students, right, that are there currently. And we'd love to see that, right, the pipeline of students that are learning, graduate, come back, help teach the new students. But starting next year, there's going to be a new way for you to do the eCTF, not just through helping your alma mater, but we're going to be opening up a professional division for the first time. Yeah. So, probably not a surprise that even once you get out of school, there's still a lot more to learn, and that the eCTF can help. But all this is only possible because of the support that we've gotten through NEMC Hub, through Microelectronics Commons, and through our sponsors. So thank you, Fortinet. Thank you, CrowdStrike, BCI, Idaho Scientific. We really couldn't do all this that you're seeing today without your support. So thank you very, very much. And then I said I got a long list, and I really do. There are so many people that I have to thank that made this possible across the MITRE team. Casey Gillette-Mallard, who unfortunately couldn't travel to be here today, but has put in so much effort into making the whole event possible, especially the award ceremony. Huge thanks to Casey. Nikki Konis, Jackie Murphy, Brendan McEntee, AJ and Sam, Allison Reardon, Lori Jan Monaco. There's so many people that have come together to pull this off. It's dangerous listing names because I'm sure I'm gonna forget somebody, but there's so many people in MITRE labs that are doing the day-to-day execution, the ones that helping you with the tech support. Ben Janis, thank you, has helped with so many different aspects of this competition. Fritz Stein, Jacob Dahl, Justin Yost, Aaron Sedia. Aaron helped me when we were doing the award ceremony and competition for this many years ago when it looked completely different and small, and so it's been great working with Aaron on this now, and I'm sure it's been a blast. Moise Solomon and the support that we've gotten from him and other senior leaders, Doug Robbins, thank you. Really, again, couldn't have done this without the whole team coming together to pull this together. So thank you to the team. I want to thank the guest speakers that we had today. Doug from Fortinet was outstanding. Stephanie Lynn, thank you for being here today. Ben Linlingler, thank you. Thank you again to our sponsors, again, Fortinet, CrowdStrike, Idaho Scientific, BCI, and Analog Devices, who donated all the hardware that we used. And with that, I'll say you're mostly free to go, except I'm supposed to advance this. Don't forget your homework, and part of that is joining our LinkedIn group, which this QR code will bring you to. Check out the museum, continue to network, and then finally, teams that won awards and sponsors, please stick around a little bit after. We want to take more photos. We love taking photos. And with that, you're free to go. Thank you.